condolence at Government House and attend a memorial service in Wellington if given the opportunity to do so. And many of your stories coming in. This one from Glenys in Tauranga. She says she met the Queen when she and Prince Philip came to Auckland. She was one of a group of children on the wharf invited to meet the royal couple. She remembers she was wearing a lemon-coloured dress and hat. They had presented a small Optimist yacht for little Prince Charles. The boat was made out of native timber, and Prince Philip was very delighted with it. A lovely couple. I am now 82, she says, but I have never forgotten that day. So many wonderful memories you are sharing with us. Do keep them coming. You can text us on 2101 and tweet us at checkpointrnz. The email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. And do stay with us. We'll be on air with you until 8 o'clock with this Checkpoint special. After the news at 5, we'll be joined by the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, who will share her memories of Queen Elizabeth II on this sad day.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Kia ora, I'm Marama Tipole. Queen Elizabeth is being mourned around the world today, from Scotland to Suva, from Papua New Guinea to Paris, where the Eiffel Tower went dark at the stroke of midnight. PNG Prime Minister James Marape says Papua New Guineans from the mountains, valleys and coasts rose this morning to the news that their mama queen had been taken to rest by God. And in Washington, D.C., President Joe Biden has described her as a stateswoman of unmatched dignity and constancy.
I just stopped by the British Embassy to sign the condolence book in her honour. I had the opportunity to meet her before she passed, and she was an incredibly gracious and decent woman. And the thoughts and prayers of the American people are with the people of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth in their grief.
The Canadian Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, has also paid emotional tribute.
She was one of my favourite people in the world, and I will miss her so. She was our queen for almost half of Canada's existence, and she had an obvious, deep, and abiding love and affection for Canadians.
In this country, 14 days of official mourning have been declared, starting today, and MPs will return to Parliament on Tuesday to pay their respects during a special session. The House will then adjourn for the rest of the week. The Speaker, Adrian Rurafe, has expressed his deepest sympathies to the royal family. In a statement, he acknowledges the Queen's service to New Zealand, in particular her efforts to resolve historical grievances between Maori and the Crown. He says she will be remembered as koutou, the white heron, in recognition of the reverence many New Zealanders have for her. A death gun salute is scheduled to take place near Te Papa on Wellington's waterfront in an hour. The 16 Field Regiment will fire 96 rounds, 1 round for each year of the Queen's life. The salute is expected to take about 16 minutes. The event is open to the public, but anyone coming along is advised to protect their hearing. And a special commemorative service will be held at St Paul's Cathedral in Wellington this evening. The Queen laid the cathedral's foundation stone in 1954 during her first visit to Aotearoa and attended services there several times. The church's bells will be rung 96 times at the end of the service. The moment the Queen died, the crown immediately passed to Charles, the 73-year-old former Prince of Wales. Here's World Watch's Perlina Lau on what happens next.
King Charles III has spent the night at Balmoral but will return to London with the Queen Consort to prepare for his first televised address as the new monarch. On Sunday, he'll be officially proclaimed king in front of the Accession Council at St James's Palace. An official known as the Garter of King's Arms will call God Save the King from a balcony. And for the first time since 1952, the national anthem will be played with the words God Save the King. Under what's believed to be called Project Unicorn, the Queen's body will be taken to London by train or plane, where the coffin will be met by Prime Minister Liz Truss and other ministers. The funeral is expected to take place at Westminster Abbey in 10 days.
Among the many New Zealanders sharing their memories of the Queen today, the head of Canterbury's Jockey Club remembers her as a passionate horse racing fan. Tim Mills says she attended a race meeting at Riccarton during the Royal Tour of 1963.
She opened a new grandstand on that day, I believe. In fact, I can recall as a young fellow when I started work at the racing conference in Wellington, taking a specially bound copy of the New Zealand stud book to Government House to be forwarded on to the Queen, and that shows her passion for the sport, that she collected the breeding records of racehorses from all around the Commonwealth.
Tim Mills says horse racing unifies from all walks of life, from the reigning monarch to the youngest stable hand. That's the news. RNZ National, back to Lisa Owen and a special edition of Checkpoint very soon. But right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Saturday. Northland and Auckland, fine spells, isolated showers during the afternoon and evening. In the west, from Waikato to Wellington, cloudy periods and isolated showers today. Scattered rain for tomorrow. Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and the central high country, also Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa. Mostly cloudy with showers turning to rain tomorrow with some heavy falls in Gisborne. Nelson and Marlborough, a few showers about coastal Marlborough. Fine spells elsewhere with isolated showers clearing this evening but returning late tomorrow. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, fine apart from a possible shower about Bulla today. For Canterbury, Otago and Southland, generally fine, with areas of low cloud, morning and night, and patchy drizzle about the coast from Banks Peninsula northwards tomorrow evening. And for the Chatham Islands, partly cloudy with the odd shower tomorrow. RNZ National, it's 5 minutes past 5.
Nā mihi marama. Tēna koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. You're listening to a Checkpoint special on RNZ National, marking the death of Queen Elizabeth II. We'll be on air until 8 o'clock tonight with tributes and memories of the Queen from here and around the world. We'll cross to London shortly, where people poured into the streets when the news broke. Floral tributes have been laid outside Buckingham Palace, and the nation begins at least 10 days of mourning. We'll also speak to the Prime Minister in the next half hour for her tribute to the longest reigning monarch. But first, after cancelling a royal engagement yesterday, fears for the Queen's health gradually increased overnight. Senior members of the royal family started to descend on Balmoral Castle in Scotland, while members of the public gathered at Windsor Castle and Buckingham Palace in England. With a wrap of the day's events in the UK, here's the BBC's Daniela Ralph.
Tuesday, the 6th of September. The last photographs of the Queen, 96 years old and still at work. Meeting the new Prime Minister at Balmoral, a duty she had been keen to fulfil, and one we now know was her final duty after 7 decades of public service. Around 4 o'clock this afternoon, a number of the Queen's family arrived at Aberdeen Airport. Her grandson, the Duke of Cambridge, was first to emerge, followed by her daughter-in-law, Sophie, the Countess of Wessex, and then her 2 youngest sons, Edward, the Earl of Wessex, and Andrew, the Duke of York. Prince William drove the family group to Balmoral to join his father, the Prince of Wales, Camilla, Duchess of Cornwall, and Princess Anne, who were already there with the Queen. Within an hour and a half of their arrival came news from Buckingham Palace. As is tradition, the announcement of the Queen's death was attached to the palace gates by 2 footmen as tributes began.
Queen Elizabeth II was the rock on which modern Britain was built. Our country has grown and flourished under her reign. She was the very spirit of Great Britain, and that spirit will endure. She has been our longest ever reigning monarch. It's an extraordinary achievement to have presided with such dignity and grace for 70 years. And with the passing of the second Elizabethan age, we usher in a new era in the magnificent history of our great country, exactly as Her Majesty would have wished, by saying the words, "God save the King."
And also from the Leader of the Opposition.
For the vast majority of us, the late Queen has been simply the Queen, the only Queen, above all else, our Queen. As we mourn her loss, we should also treasure her life, our longest serving and greatest ever monarch. Above the clashes of politics, she stood not for what the nation fought over, but what it agreed upon.
Throughout the day, there had been growing unease about the Queen's health. In the Commons, as Keir Starmer stood up to speak, Opposite him, the Prime Minister was being told of the Queen's condition. Information passed to Angela Rayner, Labour's deputy leader, who left her seat for a while to discuss the development before the Speaker of the House addressed the chamber.
I know I speak on behalf of the entire House when I say that we send our best wishes to Her Majesty the Queen and that she and the royal family are in our thoughts and prayers at this moment.
Cheered by onlookers, one of the Queen's last royal engagements was in July, with her daughter, Princess Anne, opening a new state-of-the-art hospice in Berkshire. But these kind of visits had become rare over the past year, as the Queen relied on her walking stick, her mobility compromised. The royal household had tried to adapt to keep her active and visible. A golf buggy at the Chelsea Flower Show helped keep the Queen comfortable. But she had become noticeably thinner and frailer, something that severely limited her involvement in her own Platinum Jubilee celebrations, with her family increasingly representing her. At the weekend, her son stood in at the Braemar Highland Games, always a favourite event for the Queen that she reluctantly missed. Like so much of her life, the decline in her health was played out in public. Duty may have got harder to manage physically, but mentally, even emotionally, the Queen remained engaged and working to the very end.
Daniela Ralph with that report. It is 10 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoints on RNZ National. If you're just joining us, we'll be with you until 8 o'clock this evening with this special. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, has called the Queen extraordinary.
It is with great sadness that New Zealand wakes to the news of the passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. I know I speak for all New Zealanders in conveying our deepest sympathy to members of the royal family and condolences to King Charles III on behalf of the government and New Zealanders at this time of enormous loss. The last days of the Queen's life captures who she was in so many ways, working till the very end on behalf of the people she loved. And that is why I'm sure that we will receive the news of her passing with both emotions of deep sadness, but also gratitude for a life that was utterly and completely devoted to the service of others. The Queen has been such a constant in our lives for 70 years, the longest-serving monarch in British history. Over her reign, she has come to define notions of service, charity and consistency. Her commitment to her role and to all of us has been without question and unwavering. She has also demonstrated courage, compassion and humour. A strong memory I will have of her is her laughter. She was extraordinary.
The Governor-General, Dame Cindy Kettle, paid this tribute.
It's with enormous sorrow that we acknowledge the death of the Queen, Queen Elizabeth II. Richard and I, His Excellency Dr. Davis, join with New Zealanders in mourning the loss of Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth, and we send our deepest condolences to her family, who I know will be grieving her death right now. For most New Zealanders, Queen Elizabeth has really been a constant in our lives. She's been here her whole time and she's provided a sense of continuity and stability for us. So she's a real symbol of dedication to service, having served for more than 70 years.
People across the country have expressed great sadness and admiration for Queen Elizabeth in the wake of her death. British expats have painted a picture of the mood back home, while Kiwis have expressed their shock at waking to this news this morning. And even those uncomfortable with the Crown's legacy say they admire the Queen's dedication to her cause. Our reporter Nick Trubridge and cameraman Nick Monroe report from the streets of Auckland.
Aotearoa Square, Tamaki Makaurau, some 18,000 kilometres away from the seat of Her Majesty. But the sense of sadness, of loss, is far-reaching, is palpable.
Incredible sadness, and I'm still getting waves of extreme melancholy. Yeah. You know, for a lot of people, I think it's simply that we've never known anyone else, you know, my entire lifetime, so it's a huge passing of an era.
He cuts a dejected figure in the square, dressed in a tie and tailcoat. His top hat and cane sit on a bench by his side. He's meeting with friends. They'll all be dressed like this, heading out for lunch to raise a toast to Queen Elizabeth II.
And I've spoken to several people that I know, and they've had similar feelings to me. And yes, we don't know her personally, but yes, she's had a profound, I suppose, influence on our lives in some way.
It's a sentiment shared by everyone here. We didn't know her, but we did know her. So it all comes as a bit of a shock, sorrow, quickly followed by admiration.
I've just spent a long time with her in my life, and see her did pass away at the age of 96. Was, I lost my own grandmother just recently, so I know feel for the family.
I think it's pretty amazing that 2 days ago there she was welcoming the new Prime Minister of the UK and doing that with an incredible presence and smile. I was quite touched by that, I have to say.
We don't realise how much it would have taken out from her life and how much she would have contributed to the world. But what a life! It is legendary. So yeah, good on her. Awesome.
Even amongst those uncomfortable with the Crown's legacy, express great respect for a figure who dedicated over 70 years to service.
It's a double-edged sword, but as a mother, I think, and as a leader, I think her qualities were really, really commendable. She was a very good leader.
And as we reach Auckland's downtown, the news starts to travel.
Queen died. Yeah, can we ask her? Yeah, no, shocked actually. Yeah, it's interesting to know. So yeah, we just come from Australia, so yeah.
I didn't have any idea that she had died until someone mentioned it at breakfast time. So yeah, very sad news. She is our queen. I'm not a big royalist, but it's a significant milestone, isn't it? Her death.
We all sad about how she died and what she used to do. But she was my friend. She was my best friend.
Her lifetime was full of goodness for the Empire, the Commonwealth. And I think she's been a marvellous queen.
She's in a good place now. She will be with her Prince Philip. Yeah, so, all I will say is all the best to the monarch or, the family.
Among the masses on Auckland's viaduct, there's many an expat mourning their loss while painting a picture of the mood back home.
I spoke to my mother-in-law this morning and she was shocked because it was just so quick, because obviously she was swearing in the Prime Minister on Tuesday and then 2 days later she's no longer with us.
She was held closely, whether you were a royalist or not. She was held closely by the British people. We liked her, loved her, respected her. She's been in the job a long time. So yeah, it'll be a sad UK waking up to that news.
I would think it's nearly 100% sad this morning, sadness. Everybody thinks the Queen's wonderful, and I'm sure they're right. And the royal family, I hope, and Charles will follow in their footsteps and do such a good job as she's done. So that's how I'm seeing it.
The people here use the word transcendent. Transcendent as a leader, as the world changed decade to decade, a figure admired well beyond the bounds of the Commonwealth.
Wonder how Charles is feeling this morning. I'm sure the whole country is going to be very sad about it, and the whole world will be.
I think she's going to be missed, by the people in England as well as around the world. A lot of high regard for her. It's all very positive. Yes.
But for New Zealanders, the death leaves many of us feeling hollow. A leader we all felt we knew, a constant through our lifetimes, suddenly gone.
It's just the passing of an era, isn't it? What else can you say? That's about it, It's just the passing of an era. It's going to be interesting to see what the future holds, isn't it?
It was planned that we would toast to her with a wee champers this morning, but it's turned into coffee, so that was all good. Cheers to her.
And that report from Nick Trubridge and Nick Munro speaking to people on the streets of Auckland. In a sign of the affection in which the Queen was held, hundreds of people gathered outside Buckingham Palace in London despite grey skies and rain. The BBC's Lucy Manning talked to mourners who were there.
She was long to reign over us, almost all of her life, and for most here, all of theirs. Through the streets of London they streamed to pay tribute to our Queen. What's your reaction to the news?
Oh, I'm so sad because she was a wonderful lady. She dedicated her whole life to the nation and we could just thank her for it. And we feel for her family today. It's a very sad day.
I'm so sad because she was a lovely, beautiful lady, beautiful mother and a beautiful grandmother. Could just shed many tears for her. She was very much loved.
There is a real sense that this Queen was a history maker.
It's devastating. She's going to be missed by so many people. She affected so many lives and she was an absolutely amazing monarch.
And what did she mean to you?
Well, I think as a woman, it's amazing to see a female at the helm of our country, and why I might not ever get the chance to see another woman as Queen.
She meant everything to me, my family, you know, a sense of community, you know, loyalty, you know, giving back to communities, serving, you know, the community as a whole. So she meant a lot to everyone here today. I think, you know, the biggest thing that I'll remember is, you know, her sense of sort of charity, giving back.
The crowds used to gather here in their hundreds of thousands to see the Queen on the Buckingham Palace balcony. As soon as her death was announced, they came back. There is a hush here, as the one constant in the country's life is no more. In the place where she died, Balmoral, the locals were enormously proud of their regal visitor who joined them each year.
Just very sad. She's been a monarch for over 70 years and it's history, and we just wanted to be here to share our condolences to the just be part of it kind of thing. Yeah.
It's really sad news to hear, actually. It's that's the reason we came. We were hoping to pass on our regards or just to be here. So it's kind of sad, actually.
A sad day.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for everybody, I think. You know, I think the whole nation will come together and just, you know, feel the same. Yeah.
Although, you know, you never knew her or anything, but her significance was just incredible. And it doesn't really hit home, I don't think, until you hear something like this. And what she meant to us and what she meant to the country was absolutely incredible legacy.
At Buckingham Palace, no one here truthfully is sure what to do. But they know they want to be here, to stand, to mark the moment, to bring flowers, to remember. Her kingdom is united. In sorrow, yes, but also in admiration, in the sense that we have been fortunate to live in her era. Through change and turmoil, there has always been the Queen.
And that was the BBC's Lucy Manning. So many of you getting in touch with your beautiful, funny, touching stories about your encounters with the Queen or the 6 degrees of separation. Homai o whakaaro, do keep your feedback coming. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. We'll get to some more of those during the hour. It is time, though, to go to the headlines. Ko marama anō tēnei.
Thank you, Lisa. People from across the UK and around the world are mourning the death of Queen Elizabeth II, with world leaders paying tribute to her. Canadian President Justin Trudeau described her as one of his favourite people in the world, while US President Joe Biden called the Queen a stateswoman of unmatched dignity and constancy. The throne has passed to King Charles III. He spent last night in Balmoral but will return to London today to prepare for his first televised address as the new monarch. He's expected to be officially proclaimed king on Sunday at St James Palace in London. Aotearoa is marking the Queen's death with 14 days of official mourning starting today. Official commemorations planned to pay tribute to the Queen include a special service to be held at St Paul's Cathedral in the capital this evening. A 96-round salute to mark each year of the Queen's life is scheduled for Wellington's waterfront around 6 p.m. The Governor-General says she hopes to meet with King Charles while in London to attend the Queen's funeral. Dame Cindy Kittle will be attending the funeral with Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern on behalf of New Zealand. MPs will return to Parliament on Tuesday to pay their respects to the monarch during a special session in the debating chamber. The House will then adjourn for the rest of the week. In the UK, most sporting fixtures scheduled for today have been cancelled following the Queen's death. They include all matches in the English Football League and all horse racing fixtures. It's 23 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Marama. I'm going to read one of your stories that have come in, and some of them are so funny. This is from Angus, who says, my parents were living in Kerikeri during the 1970s. Dad is a plumber and was heading to a job. However, the road was closed as the Queen would soon arrive at the stone store. The wait began to climb and Dad was becoming late. He thought he'd make it clear to her how he felt when she went past. He saw the police vehicle leading the convoy, got out of the van, and then the Queen drove past. She waved and smiled at him, so he waved and smiled back. Thank you so much, Angus. 2101 on text. We are loving your stories. Emily Nash is the royal editor at Hello magazine. She told me it had only been a few months since the Queen's much talked about Platinum Jubilee skit with Paddington Bear, and news of her death today was surreal.
I don't think the news will sink in for a few days. I think there's a real sense of shock across the country and across the world. In fact, even though we knew this moment would come and there were signs that it was coming sooner rather than later, when the announcement was made by Buckingham Palace, it still has stunned people.
Do you think that is partly because only a short time ago we all saw these pictures around the world of the Queen speaking to your new Prime Minister and smiling?
Absolutely. I mean, the photographs showed her to be fairly frail, but that's what you'd expect of someone at 96. And just the incredible milestone of appointing your 15th Prime Minister at the age of 96 is, unmatchable, really. I think people were always reassured to see her again in public, and the fact that yesterday she had to cancel a virtual Privy Council meeting sent alarm bells ringing, but we're used to seeing the Queen, we're used to seeing her face, hearing her voice. It's going to take us a very long time to get used to her not being here anymore.
Do you think those images of her working right up basically until her death, well, they're the ultimate proof of her dedication to service and duty that she promised as a young woman?
Absolutely. She, in 1947, vowed to give her whole life, whether it be long or short, to the service of the country and the Commonwealth. And she absolutely did that. She never wavered in her duties. However unwell she was, however frail she was still taking her red boxes right up to the end. And as we said, appointing her 15th Prime Minister, she showed that she had a quick wit still. We had that wonderful appearance with Paddington Bear around her Platinum Jubilee just a few short months ago. And, people who knew her well say that she was razor sharp mentally. And it's just incredibly sad, but, one hopes that she didn't suffer.
What do you think your strongest memory of her would be?
I think right now the memory that sticks in my mind is her final balcony appearance right at the end of the Platinum Jubilee. For me, it was incredibly poignant. I think she knew that was going to be the last time she stood there and took in the cheers of the crowds. And with hindsight now, I wish we'd all been able to just look at it for a bit longer.
You think she knew she was saying basically goodbye, formally?
Look, yeah, I don't know whether she knew that, but there's no doubt that she looked, I think, deeply moved by the reaction from the crowds. And I felt for her, she appeared to be emotional. And as we know, she famously never really betrayed her emotions in public. But, the last few years were incredibly difficult for her. And seeing people out there in the numbers in which they came at such a key moment in her life and in her reign will have brought her great comfort, I think.
There is a very formal process over the next few days, and obviously there is already a king a new king. What do you expect over this next period of time?
Well, what will be a very difficult time for him on a personal level, King Charles III is going to be very visible in the coming days. We're going to see him and the Queen Consort Camilla at his side back in London within hours. And I imagine he will be, making himself fairly visible. People will be getting used to the idea of having this new king. He is going to travel around the UK to different parts of the country in the coming days, and he will address the nation. So this is going to be an incredibly difficult moment for him, but one he has been preparing for all his life. I think, and I hope that there will be an outpouring of sympathy for him.
It's an interesting adjustment, isn't it? Even in our language, we're now talking about a king. In New Zealand, we've always had Queen's Birthday weekend, and the Queen is on our money. The Queen is everywhere.
Absolutely. And I think, it's going to really hit home when people see that the banknotes have changed, that the coins have changed, the stamps have changed, and all the other paraphernalia that goes with the royal brand. And that is going to sit uncomfortably, I think, with some people at first. But, this is a moment that people knew was coming for quite some time. It will still be shocking and incredibly sad for many. But I'm hopeful that people will sort of rally around the Queen's family at this incredibly difficult time, not least because the UK is going through a very difficult moment. We have a brand new head of government, we have a brand new head of state. What we do need is stability right now.
Emily, I'm asking many people this, but where were you when you heard that the Queen had died, and what was your very first reaction?
I was at my desk. I had been pretty much glued to the screen since the point where we realised something was going wrong. Notes were being passed in the House of Commons, and the rumour mill went into overdrive, and we knew that something was going on. For the palace to confirm that the Queen was under medical supervision, and in fact that family members were going to be by her side, meant I felt that the writing was on the wall. So when the news came, we'd had some kind of warning, really. And yet it was still a huge shock. I, really got a shiver down my spine, a huge adrenaline rush, and I just felt immensely sad. But I think it's going to take a few days to really sink in.
And that was the Royal Editor at Hello Magazine, Emily Nash. And joining us now is Te Piramia Jacinda Ardern. Tēna koe, Prime Minister.
Oh, good afternoon.
It is terribly sad, isn't it? No matter what your feelings about royalty, it's sad.
Oh, I absolutely agree. I think no matter what your thoughts are on the ideas of a monarchy or a republic, you just can't deny the life of service. And to know that the vast majority of the world will only have known the Queen as the reigning monarch. I mean, that is incredible.
How significant do you feel that this moment is?
I do think it's the end of an era because the Queen represented so much. She was both of an age, but she also at the same time managed to continue to be a role model for our time. And I wonder if that's just because of the sheer dignity she brought to the role.
I know you were told early this morning of her death, but were you given any kind of formal warning?
We saw the same information and received essentially the same information that was going also into the public domain. So ultimately, I think there was a decision, obviously, by the palace to be reasonably open about the Queen's status. But as you will have heard me talk about this morning, it was about 4:45-ish that I formally received notification from our team.
And today you have been talking about some of your memories of the Queen, and you've mentioned this photo that you gave her, and we've got a picture of it. And for people who can't see it, the Queen, she looks like she's sort of in a tweed suit, immaculate, with her hat and strings of pearls, and sitting there in a full belly laugh. What is going on?
So she's sitting in the back of a vehicle, and you can tell it's a photo in motion. Someone's obviously managed to just get an angle of her in the back of a car and taken it from essentially the side of the road. And that's what happened. It was during the Queen's visit to New Zealand in the 50s, and there was a woman who managed to capture this image of her in the back of a car. And when I went to travel to London for the first time to meet her in the margins of Choggum, she kindly sent me the photo and told the story of how she had taken it. We framed the photo, and when I presented it to Her Majesty, you know, she looked at it and she immediately said, I remember, she said, as we drove around the country, she said people on the side of the road would see the Prime Minister and yell, "Look, there's old Sid," and she laughed, just as she did in the photo. And the fact that she remembered that, to me, just, I think, demonstrated the real affection she had for New Zealand and the beautiful memories she had of this place.
When was the last time you would have spoken to her?
After her husband passed, and to pass on the condolences of New Zealand over the passing of the Duke. And we had a very general conversation at that time. She always wanted to just talk generally about the welfare of New Zealand. There was no set agenda, but she was grateful to know people had thought of her.
So you've been Prime Minister about 5 years, right? And you look at the Queen's service, 70 years, right? Her entire life. Can you imagine that?
No, and that is, to me, on many occasions, and I think it's one of the reasons she's a person I hold in such held in such high regard. You know, politicians, we know that our time is always limited, and that's why you just give it your all every day, because you don't know how long it will be for. She had to get up every day knowing that was her life, and so there was never a time where she could say, well, after this is done, I'll spend time with my children or my grandchildren. She had to do both all of the time, and that for me is remarkable. She lived to serve for others.
What do you think you've learnt from her? As another woman, you're both holding office. She is another woman in the highest of service. What do you think you've taken away from knowing her?
That sense of service. To me, I mean, one thing that, and I mentioned this briefly this morning, having a conversation with her during lockdown. You know, she was talking then about, even though the world was here experiencing this very unique experience and that limitation on people's freedoms, she was still in her own mind comparing it to the stories she'd heard of political prisoners who were in a status of imprisonment for decades, and reflecting on the magnitude of that. Here was someone who some would have sat back and looked at that life and perhaps perceived that she had distance from people, but she had a huge compassion for people, and that's what stood out to me. That despite those years, she never ever, I think, disconnected herself from people. She was an empathetic person, a very dignified person, and someone of great sacrifice.
And we are not going to see similar in the sense that the line of succession is, well, Charles is now king, and then there are two young men who follow him. Yes. So a queen is many lifetimes away, if ever.
And yeah, that is you're right. By virtue of the structure there, that is true, but I consider myself to have been lucky to have had that proximity, because regardless of what comes next, she was a special person in her own right.
Will we do anything, New Zealand, anything as a permanent memorial?
It's a good question, Lisa. It's something that we've been discussing. Of course, much focus has been on marking her Jubilee year. So we're still in the process of acknowledging that those years of service. She had asked that people acknowledge her time in the role through tree plantings, for instance, and we've been doing that. So there will be these long-term memorials to her, these living memorials. But we are thinking about what more we can do to acknowledge this moment in time as well.
I know it's really early, but it's interesting. Obviously, our money has the Queen on it, other official documents and things, and we have a holiday. We have Queen's birthday. Do we keep some of those things to remember her in terms of the holiday weekend? Because it kind of, I don't know, it seems a bit disrespectful or rude to erase it.
And particularly given, of course, it will come around quickly. There are some things which automatically change, and there are others which don't. But there's much that automatically changes. And I absolutely understand that people will feel somehow that does her a disservice. But I think what I would take away from even from back at Chogam, she was very clearly setting out her desire that Charles be acknowledged as the new holder of the title. And so I think that that would be a way of acknowledging her wishes, which she was making very clear from a few years ago.
So we now have King Charles III. Do you think New Zealand's relationship with the monarch will continue to be as strong as it has been under Elizabeth's reign?
There's no doubt that the strength of the relationship under Her Majesty, just by sheer length of time and connection, is vast. But I don't think that diminishes the ability of New Zealand to build its relationship as well. What I would say of King Charles is he has equally a great affinity for New Zealand. He deeply respects the relationship that we have with our environment. That's something that he's very strong on. He has a strong relationship with New Zealand through the Prince's Trust, which he's done a lot of work with our young people. He's very knowledgeable about New Zealand, and I think, again, that speaks to his love of this country, and I think he'll fully expect that it will be a relationship that will grow with time.
Thank you very much for joining us this evening. That was Te Piramia Jacinda Ardern. It is 20 to 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. If you are just joining us, we'll be with you until 8 o'clock tonight for this special program in memory of Queen Elizabeth II, who passed away peacefully today in her home in Scotland. She was 96 years old. It is time, I think, to go to the headlines with Marama.
Malo Aupito, thank you, Lisa. The Prime Minister has paid tribute to Queen Elizabeth II, the longest reigning British monarch. Jacinda Ardern told Checkpoint that the Queen's death may represent the end of an era, but she was a role model for our time. Plans are being made to take the Queen's coffin to London by plane or train under what's believed to be called Project Unicorn. It's expected Elizabeth will then lie in state in Westminster Hall for about 4 days before her funeral, allowing members of the public to file past. The funeral is expected to take place at Westminster Abbey in about 10 days' time. Charles, the former Prince of Wales, is expected to be officially proclaimed king on Saturday at St James Palace in London in front of the Accession Council, a ceremonial body. Gun salutes will be fired from Hyde Park, the Tower of London, and from naval ships. New Zealand will mark the Queen's death with 14 days of official mourning. Official commemorations planned include a special service at St Paul's Cathedral in Wellington this evening, while flags will continue to fly at half-mast. Normal business at Parliament won't be happening next week as the House of Representatives mark the death of the Queen. MPs will return to Parliament on Tuesday to pay their respects during a special session, and the House will then adjourn for the rest of the week. It's 19 minutes to 6. We'll have more news at 6.
Kia ora rā e ho. We may be half a world away from the UK, but the death of Queen Elizabeth has been keenly felt in New Zealand. Flags in and around the capital flew at half-mast this morning and condolence books set up around the city. Our reporter Rosie Gordon and cameraman Sam Rillstone have this story.
Millions of miles away from the United Kingdom, the loss of Queen Elizabeth II is hitting home. Her connections to New Zealand ever present, particularly for Claire Shirtcliffe, who met the young Queen on her first tour here in 1953 at Government House. The memory of her warmth still clear in Miss Shirtcliffe's mind.
Absolutely wonderful, smiling, and so just as though it was a lovely friend that you had suddenly met again and you hadn't seen for a long time. That's how it felt. And she just looked at you and no one else was part of the conversation. It was just her talking to you.
Claire Shirtcliffe feels she lost a friend today and was among those to sign a condolence book at the Wellington Cathedral of St Paul. Queen Elizabeth made her mark here too, laying the cathedral's foundation stone in 1954. Today, a lily sat under the plaque that marks that moment. Here's Reverend Canon Katie Lawrence, the cathedral's acting dean.
I'm personally feeling sad at the loss of our late Sovereign Lady Queen Elizabeth, a role model, a figurehead, the defender of the Anglican faith.
Anne Phillips also paid her respects at the cathedral and says she didn't realise how important the Queen was to her until she was gone.
The Queen, for me, has always been associated with our people, Ngāpuhi, which is my tribe, and because we have Waitangi. So she has been a great supporter, and I reflect on those visits that she's made to Waitangi, to the north.
People paid their respect at the National Library too, leaving messages about the Queen's impact on Aotearoa. Videos of Queen Elizabeth's visits here played on the walls. It wasn't the only place where her loss was evident. Flags here at Parliament and on the Beehive were lowered to half-mast this morning. One of the men doing that work said it was sad, but an honour. Inside, Governor-General Dame Cindy Kero and the Prime Minister signed the Parliament's condolence book. Jacinda Ardern writing, "With our deepest gratitude for your love for the people of Aotearoa." Members of the public signed the book too, including Jan Bulens.
I think it was just to pay respects, really. To pay our respects to someone who sacrificed a lot of her own life.
Nikki laid flowers on the steps of Parliament, hoping others would do the same.
Well, we heard obviously the sad news this morning of the Queen passing, and Mother and I just wanted to show our respects and lay some flowers down, really. She's reigned for a long, long time, been the figurehead for not only us but around the world, so it's a very big occasion.
New Zealanders playing their part as a much-loved monarch is honoured around the globe.
And that was Rosie Gordon reporting with cameraman Sam Rillstone, and that story will be up, the video version, on our web page. The UK is waking up as a nation in mourning. Crowds of people have gathered outside Buckingham Palace, laying floral tributes. The streets were crammed with people after the news broke on Thursday afternoon, New Zealand time. And we're joined now by Kiwi journalist Andrew Potter, who is in London. Andrew, what's the feeling been there?
Oh, kia ora, Lisa. Well, it's 6:45 in the morning here, and after 70 years and 214 days, the UK is kind of waking up to the fact that Queen Elizabeth is no longer the monarch, and such was the length of her reign that really I think you'd struggle to find too many people here that can remember a time before she was head of state.
And have they been gathering outside the palace, laying flowers, or how are they expressing their emotions?
Well, yeah, so basically, I can kind of run you through how yesterday went down. Like, kind of concern for the Queen really started to ramp up just in the early afternoon here yesterday, and that's when Buckingham Palace issued that statement saying they were, quote, concerned for the Queen's health. And that's language we've really heard associated, with the Queen, and especially coming from the palace. Now, that was followed up pretty quickly by a tweet by the new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, saying she was, quote, very concerned about the Queen's health. And really, throughout the afternoon, rumours started to swirl around, suggesting that the Queen was, in fact, gravely ill. And those really began to pick up after Prince Charles, now King Charles III, of course, and the other senior royals like Prince William headed up to Balmoral in Scotland to see the Queen. And we now know that the Prime Minister here was told of the Queen's passing at 4:30 p.m. in the afternoon. And that's when the rumours really started to circulate that perhaps the Queen had sadly passed. And that news was finally released to the public here at 6:30 p.m. And after that, I headed down to Buckingham Palace, and I went through Green Park Station. Green Park, of course, is the lovely kind of public park to the right of Buckingham Palace as you look at it. And as it's heading down those paths, this was like an hour after the news was announced, all the paths down towards Buckingham Palace were just packed with people heading in the direction of the palace. Some were carrying small bunches of flowers. As I kind of saw the palace for the first time, you could see the flag was now flying at half-mast, like all British public buildings now. And I would say that, there was a mix of people in front of the palace, some taking those flowers up to the front, laying them at the gates. A lot of people were quite curious. They were there with their phones, taking selfies, taking photos of the scene and that kind of thing. So I described the mood there as almost one of kind of curiosity because, no one I saw down there in front of the palace was probably old enough to remember life here without the Queen in charge.
So it's a time of massive upheaval in the UK, right? Cost of living, new Prime Minister and many other things. How is this all going to play out?
Well, it's super interesting, isn't it? I mean, because we saw what turned out to be the Queen's final public appearance on Tuesday, and that's, of course, when she met in Balmoral first with the departing Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Then a short time later, she met with Liz Truss, who, of course, then became the new Prime Minister, and this is the 17th Prime Minister the Queen's sworn in. And when we saw those photos of the Queen, if I could just say, certainly the journalists I was sitting amongst, we were like, oh wow, like the Queen looks very different to the last time we'd seen her a number of months ago. She was noticeably thinner. She looked quite frail, but of course very happy and kind of cheery in those photos we saw as she received first Johnson, then Truss. But of course, for Truss, now that she is Prime Minister, she has a massive amount of work to do because there is a huge cost of living crisis here, and that particularly relates to energy. Energy bills here were expected to go up tenfold because of the kind of pressures being put on the UK by inflationary pressures, but also because of the Ukraine crisis, of course. And actually, early yesterday afternoon, Liz Truss took to Parliament to try and do something about that. And she basically announced a huge government intervention in the energy sector where energy bills will be capped at £2,500 a year, approximately just over 5,000 New Zealand dollars. And she's guaranteed that for 2 years. And basically, the energy companies are still going to be to charge the same amount of money. It's just that the government will underwrite the difference in the bill between this £2,500 and whatever the company has billed. So that news, of course, and very understandably, was completely lost in the mix yesterday by the tragic passing of the Queen.
And the thing is, obviously, the King, Charles is automatically the King, King Charles III. How do you think he's going to be received? He takes up this role in a very tumultuous time, as you have described.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of news to me yesterday because I should have followed this more closely, but I was like, oh, wow, Prince Charles immediately on the BBC was being described as King Charles, and then, a little later was named King Charles III. And, I mean, I think this is going to be a very challenging time for him and the royal family. I mean, how do you follow someone as universally loved with as long a reign as the Queen? And, of course, Prince Charles, I mean, I wouldn't describe him as a much-loved public figure over here. I mean, maybe he will grow into that. But, yeah, she's just an incredibly hard act to follow. And also, Prince Charles, of course, he's had baggage down the years. Of course, he had his marriage to Princess Diana, who died 25 years ago. A few days back, he has at times, had challenging relationships with his sons. Particularly, we believe, it can be quite tense with Harry at sometimes at the moment. So I just think it's an incredibly hard act to follow in being the monarch that replaced the Queen. So there's going to be huge challenges for him.
Kia ora rā, Eho. Thank you for joining us. Nice to talk to you. It is Andrew Potter, Kiwi journalist in London there. Back home now, and a special church service is being held in Wellington tonight. Our reporter Lauren Crimp joins us from there now. Lauren, what's happening at the moment?
Kia ora, Lisa. Yes, as you mentioned, there is a special service about to take place here at St Paul's Cathedral in Wellington. It's been put on especially to commemorate the Queen this evening. Of course, as the head of the Anglican Church, she has special significance to people here. She also laid the foundational stone here in her first visit to Aotearoa in 1954. At the conclusion of the service, bells will toll 96 times, of course, one for every year of her life. The service comes after a day of people flowing in to sign the condolence book and take time to remember the Queen, her life and her reign.
And what has the feeling been like there at the cathedral today?
Well, earlier I was speaking with Reverend Canon Katie Lawrence, the cathedral's acting dean. She said people were here from first light before the cathedral doors had even opened. It has been pretty emotional for some. This morning we were down here and one lady came to lay flowers and was sobbing as she paid her respects to the Queen. We spoke to another visitor, a young British man, who said he felt extremely far away from home and it was nice. He didn't know where else to go and it was nice to come and have a place to pay his respects and feel connected to his home.
And so is there other things happening in the capital this evening?
Yes, as we speak, there will be people gathering down at the waterfront. We are expecting the New Zealand Defence Force to commence its 96 gun salute at just after 6 o'clock this evening. Of course, again, like the church bells, one for every year of the Queen's extraordinary life.
Thank you for that, Lauren. That's Lauren Crimp joining us live from Wellington. The closest most of us ordinary Kiwis will come to the Queen will be via the money we carry in our pockets, purses or wallets. But now that Queen Elizabeth's no longer New Zealand's head of state, what happens to the image on our cash? Louise Tanuth reports.
New Zealand produced its first national coins in 1933, and since then the monarch's image has always graced our currency. Queen Elizabeth II first appeared on our coins in 1953 and on our banknotes in 1967. The Reserve Bank says there isn't any immediate change to the status of our cash, so that emergency $20 in your wallet is safe. RBNZ has indicated the Queen will remain on our $20 banknotes and coins from existing stock, which will last for the next several years. But these Kiwis are now thinking about holding on to what they've got in their purses, or getting some out as a keepsake.
It adds a little bit of extra sentimental meaning to them.
I
think that's a nice way to think
only
of
I'm just
it.
realising, but yeah, it's not going to be her face on the coin anymore, is it?
As a possible investment, maybe. It might prove to be a waste of time in the end, that you have to do it to find out.
My friends actually just got back from the UK, so I was going to ask if they brought any cash back. I'd prefer that over New Zealand dollars, I think.
While new designs with King Charles III on them are still a while away, there are mixed opinions on what picture should take the Queen's place.
I don't know, sort of animals and fish and mountains. Maybe keep people off coins.
He doesn't look good enough for a coin or a note. Sorry.
I think they need to have the figurehead on there.
And it's not going to change for a while anyway, from what I hear. It's going to be a good 10 years or something before it actually happens.
I kind of like what's on there now, and I think that's a really lovely thing to keep on there, even if the face does change.
David Galt is president of the Royal Numismatic Society and part of a coin and note auction house, Mowbray Collectibles. He says the Reserve Bank will likely be looking for Kiwi designers for the new cash design, following the trend of other Commonwealth countries who have moved away from British designers.
More recently, Australia and Canada have been inclined to use some of their own designers, and I suspect people will give real consideration to whether designs by Kiwi designers will be incorporated.
He's predicting many people will be getting cash out today, but he says those that have any commemorative coins from past jubilees should store them safely, as they'll go up in value.
The Reserve Bank has been issuing those steadily, with many of the royal anniversaries observed in recent years. And there's a group of people who are very interested in collecting anything to do with royalty, and I would expect that they'll continue with those interests.
He says many collectors will have coins from 1953, the Queen's first year on them, and will be looking out for when coins are issued with Charles III.
Often people do put aside the coins of the new monarch, so you'll often find many good examples of those from the year that previous monarchs have ascended the throne.
The Reserve Bank says banks, retailers and others using or handling cash will not need to do anything differently when we introduce new cash bearing the image of the King.
Louise Tanuth reporting there. Aucklanders are mourning the death of the Queen today. Our reporter Finn Blackwell has been talking to some of them.
Around central Auckland, people have been reflecting on Queen Elizabeth's life and legacy.
Yeah, it's really sad. It's like the first thing, it's like all over TikTok, it's like all over the news, like everyone's talking about it.
All over social media.
Yeah, it's really sad. Definitely. I think everyone's really sad all around the world today about losing the Queen, yeah.
She was a very good Queen. Like we said over there, she's going to be missed. She's going to be missed.
I've already had a cry. I was just sad.
So sad. Really tragic, but what a legacy, my goodness. We knew it was coming at some stage, but it was still devastating, really. Yeah, my mum's a big royalist and so was my grandma.
It's obviously sad. She had a good innings and she was a remarkable woman.
Students at Auckland University also reflected on the monarch's passing.
She was like so important to so many people, and like there's not many people alive who remember a time without her, so it's really, really sad.
She had a long reign. I think it's quite sad.
Quite sad, and just interested to see how Jacinda Ardern will react and what will happen going forward.
Around Auckland's War Memorial Museum, the mood was sombre as passers-by sat quietly by the cenotaph.
I feel like somebody in my family's died. I'm feeling very emotional.
Full feelings for her after her 96 years and 1952 on the throne, but concerned about the future for royalty.
Oh, quite sad actually. Yeah, she's always been a big part of our life, I suppose. We've all grown up with her family and yeah, through the years.
But among all the tributes, there were some who worried for the monarchy's future.
Given the history of Prince Charles and the next generation family, I don't think the majority of people would feel as sane and stable as they used to be.
Others shared positive memories of the Queen.
I followed her always. Yeah, she was our Queen.
I was actually in Tēra yesterday we stopped for lunch, and the cafe there had pictures of when she visited there in 1954, so I was just having a look at them, yeah. But my mum had seen her there in all those years ago.
And that was Finn Blackwell speaking to Aucklanders today. A lot of your feedback coming in. This from Sarah, who says, I was fortunate to meet the Queen on the royal yacht. We queued for ages, walking in a line around and up the decks to meet her. But then suddenly, at the top of the last steps, there she was with Philip. I was so surprised to turn the corner and see her there that I didn't think of what to say. So very uncool. I said, thank you for having me. Cringe. What was I thinking, says Sarah. She smiled and said she liked my dress, and Philip said, how nice to see you again, even though I'd never seen him before. But how typically generous of them to try to put their guests at ease. Very classy people. We will not see her like again, says Sarah. Another one about a royal tour where it says, I was a student in Christchurch. One of the students managed to get in the cavalcade with her car. She put the wipers on stalks and put a pair of gloves on them, turned the wipers on and made the gloves wave back and forth. And she says, I really think the Queen actually loved it. It certainly made all of us smile. And she is suggesting that we do the same in honour of the Queen when we have her memorial. We should all put gloves on our wipers. Do keep your feedback coming, the delightful stories of your interactions with the Queen, 2101 on text.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening. Kia ora tātou. Ko marama tīpole tēnei. Tributes from around the world have been paid to the Queen. Flags are flying at half-mast in many capitals, and the Eiffel Tower in Paris went dark at the stroke of midnight. Here's the BBC's James Landau.
Throughout her reign, the Queen played a constant and significant role on the international stage. She was the monarch of 15 realms, the head of a commonwealth of some 56 nations. President Biden issued a statement saying the Queen had been a stateswoman of unmatched dignity and constancy. The President of France, Emmanuel Macron, said the Queen had embodied the continuity and unity of the British nation. Vladimir Putin, the President of Russia, who met the Queen in more peaceful times, offered his condolences, saying she had enjoyed the love and respect of her subjects and had authority on the world stage.
Well into the night in London, large numbers of people kept vigil outside Buckingham Palace despite sporadic heavy rain. Many left flowers or lit candles outside the gates. This man was one of those there.
I'm from the Commonwealth, I'm from India, and this is, as far as I could imagine, probably one of the most significant moments in the history of this country, and I just wanted to come show my respects and see what London would be like in a massive moment like this.
Dozens of London's iconic black taxis lined the road leading to the palace in tribute. The Prime Minister says discussions are underway over how to acknowledge the Queen with a permanent memorial in New Zealand. Jacinda Ardern told Checkpoint there was already a focus on acknowledging her Platinum Jubilee year.
We're still in the process of acknowledging that those years of service. She had asked that people acknowledge her time in the role through tree plantings, for instance, and we've been doing that. So there will be these long-term memorials to her, these living memorials. But we are thinking about what more we can do to acknowledge this moment in time as well.
Jacinda Ardern says no matter what someone's thoughts are over the monarchy or a republic, the Queen's life of service cannot be denied. The leader of the opposition, Christopher Luxon, has praised the Queen for her stability and service to New Zealand. He says she worked hard to keep the monarchy relevant and inclusive.
You think about the formality that existed at those times, and so she's brought it into the modern age and engaged with the public, and through the walkabouts and the visits and the attendance at public events, and been made the monarchy feel like they're part of our own families, and I think that's a pretty phenomenal legacy.
Christopher Luxon says next week will be a chance for Parliament to take a moment of reflection. MPs will gather for a special session on Tuesday before the House adjourns for the rest of the week. A death gun salute to mark the Queen's passing is getting underway on Wellington's waterfront about now. The Army's 16 Field Regiment will fire 96 rounds, 1 round for each year of her life. The salute is expected to last at least 16 minutes. Earlier, the Defence Force confirmed that one of the trucks carrying howitzers to Wellington for the salute had mechanical problems on State Highway 1 and another truck stopped to assist. The Governor-General hopes to meet King Charles while in London to attend the Queen's funeral. Dame Cindy Kiro will be attending with Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern on behalf of New Zealand. She says it's customary for the monarch to meet Governors-Generals, but appreciates that may not happen.
I feel very honoured with the fact that I have met him, and quite recently, and it was a very good meeting. And obviously all of the world will be there and trying to meet, but it would be something that we will ask the palace to facilitate if possible.
The chair of the lobby group Monarchy New Zealand, Sean Palmer, says he expects King Charles to bring a different perspective as sovereign, but believes he will do it well.
I think Charles, in the way that his mother made the monarchy a 20th century institution, brought it up out of the Victorian period, I think he's going to make it a 21st century monarchy. I think it's going to be even more approachable.
Sean Palmer believes the monarchy under King Charles will be particularly caring. A man who worked as the official silver polisher at Buckingham Palace in the 1970s says the Queen was always friendly and understanding. Peter Longy, a brother of former Prime Minister David Longy, recalls one particular time when he was staying at Sandringham Castle.
I had a party in my room one day. I had a guitar one night, and the footmen all gathered, and we all got had a bit of a sing-song. We were singing quite loudly, and there was a knock on the door, and the Queen's under-butler was standing there saying, "Would you mind being quiet? The Queen can't get to sleep."
And an Avondale teacher has described her experience of meeting the Queen as surreal. Jo Worsley worked as a dishwasher at Balmoral Castle in the 1990s and briefly met the Queen after winning a staff costume contest.
They were a very pleasant exchange, a very human exchange, and just a wonderful, wonderful lady.
Jo Worsley says all the staff at the castle revered the Queen. That's the news. RNZ National looking now at the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Saturday. Northland and Auckland, fine spells, isolated showers during the afternoon and evening. In the west, from Waikato to Wellington, cloudy periods and isolated showers, scattered rain for tomorrow. Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country, also Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa. Mostly cloudy with showers turning to rain tomorrow with some heavy falls in Gisborne. Nelson and Marlborough, a few showers about coastal Marlborough. Fine spells elsewhere with isolated showers clearing this evening but returning late tomorrow. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, fine apart from a possible shower about Bulla today. Canterbury, Otago and Southland generally fine with areas of low cloud morning and night and patchy drizzle about the coast from Banks Peninsula northwards tomorrow evening. And for the Chatham Islands, partly cloudy with the odd shower tomorrow. It's 6 minutes past 6.
Kia ora rā, Eho. Thank you for joining us. This is a Checkpoint special and marking the death of the Queen, who has died at the age of 96 at Balmoral Cottage in Scotland. Shortly in Wellington, there's going to be a 96 gun salute, a 1 gun salute for every year of the Queen's life, and we'll go there shortly. But first, as we said, the Queen died at the age of 96 at Balmoral Cottage in Scotland, and Britons are now slowly waking to an era that most have never experienced before, the start of the reign of a new sovereign. King Charles III became monarch on the death of his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, in the early hours of this morning New Zealand time. The Queen, who was always Queen of Aotearoa, New Zealand, died at Balmoral Castle at the age of 96. Here's Andrew McRae.
I here present unto you Queen Elizabeth, your undoubted Queen.
The coronation of Her Majesty the Queen at Westminster Abbey in 1953. This morning, her representative in this country, the Governor-General Dame Cindy Kero, honoured the passing of the head of state.
For most New Zealanders, Queen Elizabeth has really been a constant in our lives. She's been here her whole time and she's provided a sense of continuity and stability.
As head of the Commonwealth throughout her reign, the Queen nurtured and shaped a unique international organisation whose leaders, past and present, relied on her wisdom and judgment. One of them, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern.
The last days of the Queen's life captures who she was in so many ways, working till the very end on behalf of the people she loved. And that is why I'm sure that we will receive the news of her passing with both emotions of deep sadness, but also gratitude for a life that was utterly and completely devoted to the service of others.
Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau described the Queen as a constant presence in the lives of Canadians and described her service to Canada as forever remaining an important part of the country's history. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese paid his own tribute.
This is a loss we feel deeply in Australia. And over the course of a remarkable 7 decades, Her Majesty was a rare and reassuring constant amidst rapid change.
Tens of thousands of people gathered at Buckingham Palace well into the night to mourn the Queen.
I thought she was fantastic, a role model for everybody, and never put a foot wrong, did she?
I mean, I think people have complicated thoughts about the royal family and empires and things like that. I think that's okay, but she's been leader of this country for so many decades. It's really longer than a lot of people have been alive, so it's a very sad day.
I can't really believe it, to be honest. It's one of them things you never believe is going to happen. It's quite upsetting, really.
In South Auckland, the general feeling among people was sadness and gratitude. Residents say that even though the news didn't come as a surprise, the Queen's death means the end of an era for most New Zealanders.
I feel sad. I feel grateful. Humbled, actually. Been an amazing lady. I'm 65. This has been my Queen my entire life. We're not surprised. It had to happen. And I'm grateful to her.
Monarchy New Zealand says the Queen believed her life's mission was to serve the people of the UK and the Commonwealth. Its chair, Sean Palmer, says most people would agree that she's done just that. He now expects King Charles to bring a different perspective to the role.
I think Charles, in the way that his mother made the monarchy a 20th century institution, brought it up out of the Victorian period, I think he's going to make it a 21st century monarchy. I think it's going to be even more approachable.
The New Zealand Army will fire a death gun salute marking the passing of the Queen on the Wellington waterfront this evening. 16 Field Regiment will fire 96 rounds, 1 round for every year of Her Majesty's life.
Andrew McRae reporting there. Meanwhile, in Auckland, there have been tears as well as celebrations as locals have remembered a much-loved monarch. Well, joining us from the Fox London pub at Auckland's Viaduct is Nick Trubridge. Nick, tell us what's the atmosphere like down there?
Hi Lisa, well as you say, it was sort of commiserations this morning, but it has turned to celebrations. If you are watching us on TV, sorry about the picture, it's a little bit dark, but there is still plenty of light down here. Aotearoa's Queen, as you mentioned earlier, let's not forget that, Aotearoa's Queen, as well as all of the Commonwealth, but of course a special place in the heart of the British. And guess what? Surprise, surprise, we've found some British, one in particular. This is Danielle from Cheshire. Tell me about the day. Tell me about waking up to that news this morning and how you felt throughout the day and how you're feeling now.
So I woke up to a lot of messages this morning from people back home. I think it was over 90 messages. Very sad news to wake up to. I think that we knew it was going to happen eventually, but I don't think we knew it was going to happen this soon. I cried a lot this morning. Cried a lot on the way to work. And then in work we had morning tea to celebrate her.
Yeah. You've spoken to some people back home, obviously. How were they feeling? Paint a picture for us of, I suppose, the mood over there. I guess it's a mix, isn't it? People are upset, but there's lots to celebrate over a 70-year reign, isn't there?
Yeah, it's, she was the longest serving monarchy. only Queen that we'll ever know in our lifetime. It's going to be very strange having a king come in. But yeah, I think everybody just really loved her, and the amount of messages that are coming through, not just from the UK but from across the world, is a true testament of the kind of lady she was.
And you've toasted her?
Oh yeah, a couple of times.
I said I wouldn't do this, Lisa, but we are going to go around the table very briefly, and we're just going to ask each of the others here for a few words. You first, sir. Describe Elizabeth II.
Basically, it's just been the only queen that I've known since birth, so I don't really have that much of an opinion, to be honest.
But certainly things change after such a long reign, don't they? I mean, she's sort of the only one you've ever known.
This is very true, so maybe it's times of change, commiserations and carry on.
Could I ask you as well, ma'am, your thoughts on the news this morning and throughout the day?
Yeah, well, I guess it was a shock, but it wasn't like she had to go at some time. She was getting on a bit, but yeah, as James said, it's going to be a bit strange having a king for the first time in my lifetime rather than a queen. I'm not sure I'm going to get used to the national anthem, like that's going to be an issue for me, but yeah.
Yeah, of course. A good point there, actually, Lisa. The national anthem, of course. Does that change? I'm not an expert on that. We'll see whether it does or not. Of course, the coins will change, the notes will change, and it will be King's Day as opposed to King's birthday, rather, as opposed to Queen's birthday. A little bit to get used to, and as you heard in our package earlier, people hoping Charles can fill Queen Elizabeth's shoes, who, of course, reigned for 70 years. That's it from us down at the Viaduct. A lot of celebrating to come. It has been a very sad day for people down here, for expats out in New Zealand as well. We've spoken to a whole lot of them today, really upset at the news this morning, but also 96 years full of everything you could really want to achieve, I suppose. Do join us shortly. We will be up at St Matthew's in the city on Hobson Street, where we will be speaking to the vicar, and there might be some bell ringing, maybe 96 of them by the sound of it. Back to you.
Thank you, Nick. That's our reporter Nick Trubridge joining us from the Fox London pub at Auckland's Viaduct there. Some people raising a glass to Queen Elizabeth. And you may be hearing in the background the 96 gun salute. It is happening on Wellington's waterfront right now. We'll go live there shortly to our reporter, but that is the gun salute, 96 shots, one for every life of Queen Elizabeth, one for every year of Queen Elizabeth's life. It is 6:15. Kia mau tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. The sun is rising and the UK is waking up to its first full day with a new monarch. Thousands of people went to Buckingham Palace to pay their respects as the news started to emerge. Queen Elizabeth had died. The BBC's Tim Moffat reports.
An event we all knew would come one day. But for so many, one that is so profoundly sad.
It's heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking.
What did she mean to you?
The Queen means everything to me like my mum means to me. She was a fantastic lady. She'll always be a fantastic lady. She'll always be a part of my life forever. And I'll never forget her.
She meant a lot to me. For someone my age, I've got quite old grandparents who were born in the 1917 and 22, so she was part of their lives too. So talking to them, they knew her growing up, and it takes a thread back to that sort of era. And now I hear people talking about a king and a coronation, and it puts conversations I had with them in my head of when they would talk about a king, a coronation. So it feels very strange to have this person that's been the head of everything in my life go. The McGrath family are from Dublin and are on holiday in London.
Well, our two countries have been so close over so many centuries, and we've had a tough past, but it goes without saying that she was an iconic woman and a role model for women of all ages and all colours and beliefs. And my mum has been a fan of the Queen for so many years. She was a fan of her integrity, and she's very sad. Yeah. Yeah, we shed a tear today.
Throughout her reign, Queen Elizabeth II was unwavering in her dedication to her role as monarch. And for so many people here, it is vital to honour and respect the role she played in our national story. The reign of King Charles III has begun. But for many, the reign of Queen Elizabeth II will never be forgotten.
The BBC's Tim Moffat reporting there. A 96-gun salute has just happened on the Wellington waterfront, and our reporter Crystal Gibbons joins us from there now. Kia ora, Crystal. 96 gun salutes. Tell us about that.
Hey Lisa, 96 was quite a lot. It was kind of like the fireworks, which are also down here at the waterfront, except very, very sombre. But in terms of the noise, not nearly as bad as we feared, but yeah, 96 is a lot to get through.
Yeah, commemorating every year of Queen Elizabeth II's life. Did many people come down for it? I can see a few people moving around behind you there. What was the crowd like?
Yeah, we reckon there was over 1,000 people here. We had a little wander before the salute, and there are people just crowded at both ends of the waterfront. It's quite a long waterfront, and people are just everywhere.
And the mood, tell us a little bit about that, Crystal.
Yeah, so it's been quite interesting. Overall, been very quiet and sombre. The noise that you might be hearing behind me now is about as noisy as it's been in the entire hour we've been here. But what's been really interesting is all the children that have come along tonight. And shout out to their parents, because those kids have behaved beautifully. They've been silent, they've been quiet, not a tear amongst them. So yeah, sombre, but just really kind of considered for remembering Queen Elizabeth.
Thank you, Crystal. Crystal Gibbons joining us there from Wellington Waterfront. The 96 gun salutes have just rung out there down in Wellington. It is 19 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. If you are just joining us, we'll be with you until 8 o'clock tonight for this special program in memory of Queen Elizabeth, who passed away peacefully today at her home in Scotland at the age of 96. Many of you have been sharing your memories with us, so thank you for that. And in the summer of 1963, the Queen and Prince Philip travelled to New Zealand, spending 12 days here. Now, during their trip, they stopped in sunny Napier in the Hawke's Bay. Grant Simpson, his 3 siblings and mum and dad had driven over an hour in the hopes of catching a glimpse of the royal family. They got much more than a glimpse, and Grant joins me now. Grant, you were only 3 years old at the time. What do you remember?
Well, I just remember that we were on the side of Marine Parade and the Queen and Prince Philip came walking past, and the Prince stopped and looked at me and said, "What a lovely boy." And Mum handed me over to him and I was aghast. I thought, this is terrible. It was horrible. And so I pushed his face away and I kicked and thrashed, and he let me down onto the ground and I took off into the crowd.
So did your mum tell you why she handed you over?
Well, she was just proud that the Prince stopped and looked at me. I was horrified. I thought she was giving me away, and I thought, oh, God. So I panicked and
gave him a good shove, Grant.
Yes, right on the jaw. Yeah,
so,
but I didn't know who he was. It was just a reaction, you know.
Now, it's a very vivid memory for you. What did Prince Philip smell like?
Oh, some sort of cologne. I don't know what it's called, but it was excellent anyway, whatever it was.
And did you get a glance of the Queen?
I think so, but I don't really remember that.
And after you go, Grant, you got a bit of a glance?
Just this terrible man that picked me up and was going to carry me away from Mum. I thought, oh no, I'm out of here. And so I thrashed away.
How do you feel today when you heard the news of the Queen's death?
Well, terrible. It's horrible, but, you know, we've all got to go sometime, including my father. But,
So, bit of a sad day.
yeah, it is.
I really appreciate you sharing your memory with us. That is Grant Simpson from the Hawke's Bay there, and he tells that story of being there to see the Queen and Prince Philip. Mum handed him over, proud as punch. He had other ideas and gave the Prince a really good shove and did a runner. The Queen has reigned for 70 years, and for lots of us, she's the only Queen we've ever known. There are others who remembered her coronation and have followed her life with great interest ever since. Our reporter Leonard Powell visited Clare House in Mount Eden, a retirement village that's got about 60 people living there, and some of the tenants were kind enough to share their stories about the Queen.
Janet Bell is 70 years old. The Queen ascended the throne the same year Janet was born. She says she heard the sad news early this morning from fellow resident Francis.
This morning at about just after 7 o'clock, the lady across the way came down and told us the Queen of England had died during the night.
And what was the reaction like here at Clare House?
I don't know, not many people were up. There was a few around, but there weren't many people up then. It's quite early.
Francis came to New Zealand as a 17-year-old from England and was the first in Clare House to hear the news.
My son rang me. My son lived on Waiheke Island, and he rang me and he said, "You know what, Mum?" He said it came through. He has in the front room he has computers and all that, and he said it actually came through on the computer. It came on the computer to say that Queen Elizabeth had passed away.
Francis says she has a special sentimental attachment to the Queen.
My son, for Mother's Day, and he brought me a beautiful Mother's Day book of the Queen, and it's beautiful. And every Sunday, I look at every photo and I go through all the yeah, I do.
When I visited Clare House mid-morning, every room had its television switched on to the news. There was a sense of sadness in the air, but also a sense of joy in reminiscing about the Queen. Outside in the sun-drenched garden, 86-year-old Alex recalls the changing of the guard.
I was at intermediate school when she was crowned. You know, we had to stop saying God Save the King, and we were instructed to say God Save the Queen. We didn't want to know about it, but that was the way it was.
Alex says things looked a little different 70 years ago.
We didn't have television, so it was on the radio or in the movie theatre or somewhere with all those things, and you took a bit of notice if you did. And then, of course, if you travelled and went to England, you had to go to London. And whether you ever saw her there was a matter of luck.
Did you ever go to London?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
And did you ever see her there?
No, I don't think so.
He remembers the sense of unknown when the Queen came into power.
Well, what comes next? What comes next? You know, that was where it was. We didn't have television like we've got today, where everything's, no matter somebody farts in London, we see it here 5 minutes later.
People who lived to 100 would famously receive a letter from the Queen. Alex recalls a friend who brought up the ton.
There was somebody in a Rotary Club that I was in that reached 100 and got a letter from the Queen. And of course, getting to 100 in this generation, as in the 1940s or 30s, there's more of them. In those days, you got to 60 and you'd had enough.
Francis says her great-auntie also made it to the milestone.
She was about 108 or 109 when she died. So she did, yes.
Did you ever see the letter?
No.
Did she keep it she kept it close to herself?
Yes. Yes.
Alf, who is also 86, is in charge of the beautiful gardens at Clare House. A former railway worker, he recalls the Queen visiting New Zealand at a hectic time.
We built a platform on the last carriage for her to observe her outside while she's travelling. And the other thing is, there was a couple of disasters. There was the Brinduran disaster when she was here, and the Tēnei disaster. So that's not a very good memory, but it happened when she was here.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes. I worked for the railways as a apprentice, and we worked on the carriages. And the Tēnei bridge, we worked on that. So it's all part of it history.
Alf says a massive hole has been left from the Queen passing.
Irreplaceable. She's a wonderful woman. No one will ever take her place. Yeah, but it's very, very sad.
It's a sentiment shared by many at Clare House, including Daphne, who says she will always remember the Queen fondly.
I just wanted to say how much I've appreciated the Queen's life of selfless service. I think she has been a remarkable woman. Those are my very strong feelings, is that she just was an amazing, amazing woman.
And let's get to some more of your stories now. Catherine's got in touch and says, as a scarfie in Dunedin in the 90s, my flatmates and I stood in the octagon as the Queen and Prince Philip did their walkabout. As they passed us, we shook hands with the Queen. Straight away, my flatmate declared, not bad looking for an old Sheila. Just as Prince Philip got to us, he heard and laughed. I can imagine. There is something just real and raw about our Kiwi encounters with royalty, and this delightful one in too. When I woke up my son this morning, I told him of the Queen's passing. His response, at least she got to have tea with Paddington before she died. The beauty of childhood, indeed. And that is, wow, it's one of the things that people will remember, that skit with Paddington Bear tapping on her teacup to the drum beat of that Queen song and pulling a marmalade sandwich out of her handbag. Joyce Blakey, 83 years old, was 15 at the time when the Queen was visiting Timaru in 1953. She and her best mate slept out all night in Ashbury Park in order to have a front row view the next morning. Her father brought breakfast in a hot thermos for the group early the next day, and they saw the Queen as she walked right close by them. The story's been told by Megan, her daughter, and she says, my mum recalls it was a very memorable occasion. Do keep your stories coming. Homai o whakaro. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. We'll be with you until 8 o'clock this evening. It is time now to go to the headlines. Anea Catriona mina pita pita kōrero.
Kia ora, Lee. Britain is waking up to its first full day as a nation in mourning following the death of Queen Elizabeth II. Crowds of people are gathering again outside Buckingham Palace, laying more floral tributes. King Charles will soon travel to London with the Queen Consort to prepare for his first televised address to the British nation. And in Aotearoa, a proclamation of accession ceremony will be held at Parliament on Sunday to mark the King's accession to the throne. Those are the headlines. More details in the news at 7.
Ngā mihi, Catriona. Victoria Arbiter is a royal commentator and author, and she's now based in the United States, where she says people are also mourning the death of the Queen, whose reign spanned the terms of 15 US presidents.
People here are really mourning her loss as well. The Empire State Building has announced that it's going to be lit purple tonight in tribute to the Queen. And so I think that really speaks to how much people are mourning around the world, regardless of whether or not they met her, simply because in one way or another she impacted their life at some time. And I think people are going to be mourning for quite some time to come.
She said herself, in her own words, as a 21-year-old, that her whole life, long or short, would be devoted to service. She was very much true to her word, wasn't she?
Wasn't she just? It was just a couple of days ago that she welcomed the 15th Prime Minister of her reign. And in the photographs that were released from Balmoral, again, she looked a little frailer, a little more stooped, but there was colour in her cheeks. And I think we had all become quite accustomed to this Queen that conducts her constitutional role from behind palace walls. Certainly the pandemic made all of us used to work the working from home model. But the fact that she was able to greet the new Prime Minister, I think, suggested that she was doing okay, even though the odd engagement had been cancelled. So, yes, she was determined to do her job right up until the very end, and that's exactly what she did.
I suppose that's partly what's so surprising about it, isn't it, Victoria? We just saw those pictures. And as you say, she was a little frail, but she was her broad smile, doing her duty there right up until the very end. But we didn't know that was, you know, the last official duty, in fact, that she would carry out.
Yes, and I'm so grateful now in hindsight to have those beautiful images that were released, because that she had a smile that lit up her face and she looked so radiant, and she was doing what she felt was her responsibility and was her duty, and she wouldn't have had it any other way. And so I feel like she will have died with a sense of peace that she has she's leaving a neatly packaged monarchy with a blueprint unlike any other previous monarch. And I think her legacy is going to be felt for generations to come. And now we have to embrace a significant period of change. The Queen, it's not just her physical presence that we're going to miss, but it's her likeness on coins, on stamps. We see the Queen in so much of our everyday life. And of course, now all of that, we're going to see this transitional period. And I think it's going to be quite discombobulating for a lot of people. It's a new normal on the back of a lot of new normals that we've had to get used to in recent years with the pandemic. So certainly a tremendous sense of loss is being felt. And I think we just need to allow ourselves time to grieve, and that's certainly what the next 10 days is going to give us with this national period of mourning.
So the Queen's reign, 70 years, and a lot of people will say very few missteps. But when you look back at what you've covered, what do you think her highlights will be remembered as? And there were some lows, weren't there?
There were some lows, but very few lows. And I think that really speaks to just how remarkable she was as well. I suppose if we were to pick one particular low, perhaps because it was the most significant, it would be the week following the death of Diana. The Queen was heavily castigated by the press and the public for not returning to London immediately upon the news of Diana's passing. But I think in hindsight, people can look back now and recognise that it was the only time throughout the course of her incredible reign that she chose family over duty. In that moment, she chose to be a granny versus a monarch. She recognised that she needed to be present for her grieving grandsons. It was undoubtedly the right decision, but my goodness, she paid a heavy price with all the negative press that came as a result. But I think people quickly forgave her for it when she did return to London and she gave that wonderful speech from Buckingham Palace where we could see everyone mingling in the background as she addressed the nation. But I think the lows, the highs, are what people are really going to focus on. And there are so many. But for me, I think it's those moments where we saw the real essence of Queen Elizabeth II, the sense of humour that we didn't get to see terribly often. So most recently, that charming, wonderful sketch with Paddington Bear for the Platinum Jubilee celebrations, where she was tapping the top of her teacup and bringing in Queen, the band, outside on the Victoria Memorial. Again, in 2012, when she was doing the skit with James Bond for the London Olympics, that was so much fun, and I think she really got into the spirit of the celebratory spirit of the Olympics. And I think really what Britons loved so much about her was that she provided a focus for national unity in times of national sadness and national joy. People gravitate to Buckingham Palace whether they are grieving or whether they are celebrating. And I think that unifying presence really was one of her most remarkable attributes, and I think that's how people are going to remember her when they think of those high points of her reign as well.
And that was royal commentator and author Victoria Arbiter. Te Papa has a small but select collection of royal memorabilia from the Queen's visits to New Zealand. Eva de Jong and visual journalist Angus Drever got a behind-the-scenes tour today from history curator Katie Cooper.
What we've got out here is just some of the objects in the Te Papa collection that relate to Queen Elizabeth II. A lot of what you'll see here relates to the first tour, which was in 1953-54. It was the first time a reigning monarch had ever come to New Zealand, and it was such a big event. They reckon 3 out of every 4 New Zealanders saw the Queen during that tour, and everyone wanted something to remember that occasion. So there were heaps of commemorative items made, from very elegant pieces of china to little badges that were just sort of made from tin and quite inexpensive. So we've got a real range of material here. A couple of the pieces that I really love, there's some scrapbooks that were made by Catherine Riley, who was a student when the Queen visited in 53-54. She was a student here in Wellington. She was about 10 years old at the time and loved the royal family, was totally excited by all the sort of glamour of this royal event. And she made these beautiful scrapbooks with newspaper clippings and photographs and tickets for events and things like that, really detailed sort of records of this event. So I think it's lovely to have it from her perspective, this very exciting occasion.
Would that have been common at the time, or was she just a big fan?
No, I think it would have. Based on what we have in the collection, I think lots of people wanted to commemorate this tour. We've got embroideries that were made to mark the occasion, all sorts of different things that people made to remember having seen the new monarch.
Do you want to talk to me a bit about the periscope?
Yes, so that's another commemorative object, probably more sort of inexpensive item that maybe was made to use and then throw away, but someone's obviously kept it as a special memento. And it's made of cardboard, but it's got 2 mirrors, top and bottom, that you can angle so that you get a better view of the monarch, because of course with all those crowds and all of these major centres, it was quite hard to get a glimpse of the new Queen. So this periscope, I guess, just enabled you to get a better view. And it was a sort of marketing thing. It was made by a tea company, I believe, here in New Zealand, that they maybe gave out to kids or people, who couldn't get such a good view.
What is your favourite piece from the collection?
I actually really love the golden coronation carriage, and I think people might remember when the Diamond Jubilee happened earlier in the year, they had the carriage out as part of the procession with a hologram of the Queen in it, and it's just so sort of magic and it's so over the top and sort of glitzy, but I think there's something of that magic in that object, so I really love that one.
And how do you think New Zealanders will sort of remember the Queen's tours of New Zealand?
Oh, well, I think for the people that were here for those tours, particularly the early ones in 53 and 63, they were so exciting. New Zealanders had been through a depression, a war, rationing, big union strike in 1951. I think they were ready to celebrate and ready for some excitement and celebrity, and I think the Queen and Prince Philip coming to New Zealand really provided that. And it must have been just such an occasion to be there with so many other people, so many hundreds of people that flocked to these events and to celebrate those occasions. I think people will really remember that very fondly, and I'm sure that many people in New Zealand have objects like these ones on their mantelpieces or somewhere in their homes that they're looking at now and thinking of that time. So I think it's probably a really special time for people.
And that was Te Papa history curator Katie Cooper talking about the museum's collection of royal memorabilia. If you want to check it out, the video version of that story, you can see the display. It'll be up on our web page. Still a lot of stories coming in here, and they all seem to be Kiwi encounters with royalties. A little twist, something happens, not always going to plan. But this person says they were at the University of Otago Library 1972, and it was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The library was empty because apparently heaps of students were outside protesting during the visit from the royal family. This person says they thought they were being rude and disrespectful at the time, so they were just quietly getting on with their study in the library. And this is where they picked the story up. Suddenly, the swing doors opened and the University Vice-Chancellor walked through with the Queen and Prince Philip. To my utter amazement, the Queen made straight for me and chatted to me about 5 minutes. She knew immediately from looking at my work that it was ancient Greek. She was just charming. No sooner had the Vice-Chancellor whisked her away when Charles and Anne appeared with another university dignitary, and both made a beeline for my desk and sat either side of me. We got on like a house on fire, and they had to be pressured to move on. I commiserated with them and whispered that this was all very boring for them. Someone else says 1974, they say, their memory of the Queen. Some of you have got your dates slightly wrong, but the memories are still strong. This person says when the Queen and Prince Philip and Princess Anne and Mark Phillips and Prince Charles all came over for the opening of Parliament, it was one of just a handful of, they were just one of a handful of military personnel from Defence Headquarters to be invited. Anyway, they say, I was standing up on the balcony and the Queen walked in. We made eye contact. She was beautiful, powder blue suit and pearls, flawless peaches and cream skin, very calm and gracious, says Lana from Tauranga. Do keep those memories coming in, 2101 on text, or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Several Maori leaders have paid tribute to the Queen. During her reign, Queen Elizabeth had many meetings with Maori leaders and visited many marae and the Waitangi Treaty grounds. But as Jamie Tahana reports, many have also acknowledged a complex array of feelings.
When the news was announced this morning, the Kingitanga put out a statement. Kingi Tuheitia and Mako Ari Ki Atawhai send their aroha and respect, it read. Chief of Staff Tēna Simmons said the houses of Windsor and Tūrangawaewae had a deep relationship.
The relationship between them was one of profound respect, grace and beauty, as the two of them sought to embody, certainly from a Kingitanga perspective, the heart of treaty relationships.
Throughout her reign, Queen Elizabeth visited marae and Māori communities across the country. Royal visits that were cause for celebration, as Waikato Tainui historian and academic Tom Rua recalls.
The absolute joy of our elders and of the people when she insisted that the car stopped and she got off and walked amongst our people at Tūrangawaewae.
But also raru, like at the 150th anniversary of the Treaty of Waitangi in 1990.
That you have marginalised us. The partner that has been marginalised is me. The language of this land is yours.
We are strong enough and honest enough to learn the lessons of the last 150 years and to admit that the treaty has been imperfectly observed.
Tēnei Simmons acknowledges there'll be a complex range of emotions felt by many Māori.
From a Kingitanga perspective, the passing of Queen Elizabeth is significant because she represents our treaty partner. And so it is important that we acknowledge her passing. We respect there is a tension there for Te iwi Māori, and we have to hold that tension and balance. But Kingi Tuheitia firmly believes that this is a time where we acknowledge.
The Ngaitahu leader, Tā Tipini O'Regan, says overall he believes the Queen herself took a great interest in putting things right. Tā Tipini says the political debate in the early 90s was questioning whether the treaty applied to the South Island, with an argument that it was, in their terms, discovered. He says things changed when she had a hand in a speech made by the Governor-General on her behalf at Waikawa Marae.
She very plainly said that the treaty applied into Waiponamu by right of cession and consequently, of course, I interpolate, not by right of discovery. And at that point, the lawyers, commentariat and Mr Muldoon ceased all talk. She knew what she was doing too.
And in 1995, Queen Elizabeth and Te Ariki Nui Dame Te Atai Rangikahu stood shoulder to shoulder to sign an act with a Crown apology.
The Waikato Party Claim Settlement Bill, 1995.
Waikato Maniapoto elder Tom Roa says it was a significant moment.
That apology from the reigning sovereign of a colonising nation to a colonised people had never ever occurred before. And this significant event played a huge role in the recovery of our people.
Tom Roa says there will no doubt be debates to have, but now is the time to mourn. But either way, he says the treaty will endure.
Jamie Tahana reporting there. For 16 years, from the early 1990s, fielding man Patrick Nolan was one of the Queen's bodyguards, the traditional kind living in the Tower of London. He was the first non-British serviceman to hold the post of yeoman warder, colloquially known as a beefeater. Manawatu reporter Jimmy Allingham spoke to him at his home, where the flag was lowered to half-mast this morning.
The walls of Patrick Nolan's fielding home are festooned with memories from London. But, he says, the best memories he and his wife Dawn hold are of the people they met, including Queen Elizabeth II.
Meeting the Queen was a privilege. We were her bodyguard as being yeoman warders, and, I don't know, I met her innumerable times. We were a bit privileged, so we did a couple more garden parties than the average person did, and we had one to celebrate her Golden Jubilee, where all of her bodyguard were in the palace, and it was a cracking day. All the royals were there.
Mr Nolan says the Queen was a calming presence, albeit with a wicked sense of humour. He'd give advice to nervous subjects before a meeting, telling them to pretend they were speaking to their nan.
There was an aura around her. She was dignified. When she spoke to you, she was interested. She totally zoomed in on you, and then she would talk, ask a question or two maybe, and then she would move on, and it wouldn't be like she's just turned you off. It was time to move on, and she did it so very, very well.
Yeoman warders also act as tour guides for visitors to the Tower, which they've guarded since Tudor times. More than 45 million tourists passed through during Mr Nolan's years in London, and it's a fair bet many of them will be, like him, in mourning. And how do you feel today?
Down in the dumps. All overcome, we're dismal.
Yeah. So it's sad news for you?
It is very, very sad, but we don't live forever. I'm 70-something. I've had my 10. It's sad.
Yeoman warders rub shoulders with all royals, so Patrick Nolan has seen much of King Charles III.
He's going to be a bloody good king. He started doing things before anybody else did. Remember, he was the chap that talked to the plants. He talked to the trees, and everybody said, ho ho, what a silly old thing he is. But he was part of the very beginning of recycling, of making things better, of just looking after the planet.
Becoming a yeoman warder is no easy thing.
To become a yeoman warder, we must have done a minimum of 22 years in Her Majesty's Army, the Air Force of the Royal Marines. We are expected to be married. We must be in possession of our long service and good conduct medal. We must maintain a dwelling within the walls of the Tower of London. We do pay rent, council tax, gas, water, electric and such.
A small cost for living among royalty. Patrick Nolan retired as a yeoman warder in 2008.
And that report from Jimmy Allingham. Across the South Island, many are recalling fond memories of Queen Elizabeth II and sadness at the news of her death. Flowers have been laid and messages of condolences left in honour of the UK's longest-serving monarch. Samantha G has more.
Ngāi Tahu leader and kaumātua Tā Tipene o Regan recalls meeting Her Majesty at Waikawa Marae, near Picton. At the time, the iwi had been battling to have the rights of the Treaty of Waitangi applied to Te Waiponamu, the South Island. He inquired as to the Queen's views on the matter and says her response, through then Governor-General Sir Paul Reeves, was a significant moment for him.
She very plainly said that the treaty applied into Waiponamu by right of cession and consequently, of course, I interpolate, not by right of discovery. And at that point, the lawyers, commentariat and Mr Muldoon ceased all talk.
He says Her Majesty was very much aware of the impact of her words.
It was a pivotal moment for me because I had this backfight going on all the time with the Crown and with the legalities of the Ngāi Tahu claims. And it was the end of it. He couldn't go much past something signed by the Queen.
Canterbury Jockey Club Chief Executive Tim Mills says the Queen was a passionate racing fan and attended a meeting at Riccarton Park Racecourse during the Royal Tour in 1963.
She opened a new grandstand on that day, I believe. In fact, I can recall as a young fellow when I started work at the racing conference in Wellington taking a specially bound copy of the New Zealand stud book to Government House to be forwarded on to the Queen, and that shows her passion for the sport, that she collected the breeding records of racehorses from all around the Commonwealth.
He says horse racing unifies people from all walks of life, from the reigning monarch down to the youngest stable hand.
My mother and father, in fact, escorted her at the Trentham races when she visited them. Dad was on the committee of the Wellington Racing Club when she visited Wellington. So I still have a copy of the commemorative race book from that meeting that Dad kept, and I snavelled that when he passed away. So, yes, my mum and dad met the Queen on a racecourse as well.
Shirley Piddington of Timaru has been a lifelong fan of the royal family, particularly Queen Elizabeth II, and has twice been part of large crowds to meet her. In 1977, she and her husband met the Queen and Prince Philip as part of their local car club.
I was very pleased with my husband because he bowed to the Queen. I said after, I didn't know you were going to bow, and he said, I didn't know I was either. Bowed right from the waist. And so the Duke spoke to him about the car, and I can't remember the little bit of trivia, welcome to Timaru or something, I think I said to the Queen.
People strolling through the Botanic Gardens in Aotearoa today stopped to reflect on a monarch they described as impressive, dedicated and wonderful. Mitch says the Queen's long commitment to service was astounding.
I have a class at Middleton Grange and we had a moment of silence, and so it's a thing to remember. She's been on the throne for 70 years. It's incredible and sad to see her go.
His wife Elizabeth says along with sadness comes memories of a graceful, devoted monarch.
I also think of her as being such a legend, and just to come into being a queen at such a young age as she did an amazing job. I can't even imagine, just doing that as a young person. But I was very saddened, but I also said she lived a life very well and reigned very well and did her work with excellence.
It took Angus a moment to appreciate the gravity of her death.
I thought it would be something that probably wouldn't have impacted me greatly, but you look back and you think of the time she's spent in that role and what she's done. It's actually significant. I can feel for her family.
From a Sunny Park bench, Villy believes it's the end of an era.
It is a feeling of sadness and a passing of a good person, a very good person. She'll be missed in the world. So I can imagine it's very sad for her family. And it's a change of an institution, so it's a passing of an older age.
John thinks there will be big boots to fill.
She was a wonderful lady. She's the only queen I've known. What I like about her is she's conscientious. She's done the job really well. I don't know the next person is going to be as good at being the regent as our queen was, but I think she's done a wonderful job, wonderful role model.
At the Dunedin City Library, a former soldier who spent time as a guard of honour at Balmoral Castle was looking at a display commemorating Her Majesty's life.
She loved her country, she loved her job, she loved her Commonwealth, and she's a person who will be remembered for the things she done to help the nation, to help her Commonwealth, to help the country.
He says Queen Elizabeth II leaves a legacy as both a good and kind sovereign.
Samantha G reporting there. And another one of your stories now. This person says, when I was 3 years old in Cathedral Square in 1977, I was trying to push an older lady out of the way so I could see the wizard. Apparently Her Majesty took it in good humour as she looked down at me, and lucky the police seemed unperturbed by this miniature menace. The death of Queen Elizabeth has also caused an outpouring of tributes as well as several cancellations in the sporting world. Clay Wilson wraps up the reaction.
A little more than 3 kilometres from Buckingham Palace, the third cricket test between England and South Africa had begun at London's Oval Ground. But the news of the monarch's death saw officials suspend the second day's play. New Zealand's top men's team also paid tribute, with Black Caps coach Gary Stead offering his sympathies on behalf of the side.
Very, very sad for, the whole Commonwealth to wake up to that news this morning. I guess there's been a bit of chat around the breakfast table this morning around the impact that she's had on the Commonwealth countries as well. So, yeah, we are obviously very sad about that.
England's biggest sport also reacted. The English Football League cancelled 2 fixtures, while British media reported that the Premier League were pondering a decision on their weekend fixtures. On the outskirts of Greater London, the flagship event of golf's European Tour suspended play. BMW Championship organisers pushed the second round back by one day, with the course and practice facilities closed. In rugby, the Premiership Cup match between Saracens and Northampton was postponed, while Scottish rugby suspended all domestic matches this weekend. Several All Blacks contingents were granted an audience with the Queen, with the team posting a tribute on social media featuring photos of players such as Tēna Umanga, Andrew Mertens, Jerry Collins and Ma'anonu meeting Her Majesty. Current All Blacks coach Ian Foster says he admired the Queen's spirit and tenacity.
Well, didn't know personally, but anyone who's sort of served 70 years in service and done it to the degree of, I guess, discipline that she's done deserves a lot of respect. So, sad day.
On a personal level, the Queen's greatest sporting passion was horse racing. She took over her family's racing and breeding operations when she became monarch in 1952 and had immense success. Jockeys wearing her racing colours of purple, gold and scarlet racked up more than 1,800 wins. The British Horse Racing Authority has suspended all events for 2 days. The Queen's death was also being marked in sport outside of Britain, with the US Open Tennis Championships and Formula One observing silences in her honour.
And that was Clay Wilson reporting. Obviously now the UK is entering a period of mourning. It's going to be at least 10 days. And then there's a a mapped out plan that happens over that time. So let's just share a bit of that with you. It is called Operation Bridge, and it was first created by Buckingham Palace in the 1960s. And the Queen's death sets this plan in motion. It's intricately detailed around her funeral and the new monarch's formal accession to the throne. On the first day of mourning, there's gun salutes at Hyde Park and Tower Hill, and the new King Charles and the Queen Consort Camilla will travel from Balmoral to London, and that will happen later tonight. King Charles is expected to meet with the new Prime Minister Liz Truss at Buckingham Palace on Friday, and that's UK time. He'll also meet the Earl Marshal, who is the person in charge of the funeral arrangements, and then King Charles will sign off those plans. And at about 6 p.m. local time, 5 a.m. New Zealand time, King Charles is expected to make a televised address. Now, the UK Parliament doesn't usually sit on a Friday, but they will, and will confirm the length of national mourning. Now, we are told that could be anything from 12 to 13 days up until the Queen's funeral. All other parliamentary business will be suspended for 10 days. On Saturday, Charles will be formally proclaimed king, and a principal proclamation of the new king will be read out. Now, that happens from a balcony at St James's Palace, and with that is a 41 gun salute which will be fired in Hyde Park, and a further proclamation is read at the Royal Exchange in London with a 62 gun salute at the Tower of London. So there is very intricate plans about what happens next, and also leading to the Queen's funeral.
RNZ News at 7. Ngā mihi nui, I'm Catriona McLeod. A former Prime Minister says he found the Queen to be a font of wisdom on international politics when he spent time with her. Sir Geoffrey Palmer met the Queen on several royal tours to New Zealand, and he was Prime Minister in 1990 when she visited for almost 3 weeks. He says she had a huge amount of knowledge, as she had known every politician of any importance for so many years. Sir Geoffrey says people never had a conversation with her without learning something. He says she reigned with distinction and will be greatly missed. The Governor-General says she remembers the Queen as someone with a great presence. Dame Cindy Kiro says she was able to meet her in person a couple of times as well as online.
I can remember actually meeting her at the South Pacific Festival of the Arts. I was in the kapahaka group that did the welcome, and I thought she was someone who had a real presence about her. She was rather small in stature, but big in presence.
Dame Cindy says there will be 14 days of mourning for the Queen, beginning today. When the Queen came to the throne in 1952, Britain was still emerging from austerity after the Second World War. The Prime Minister at the time was Winston Churchill, and Russia was still led by Stalin. Commenting on the Queen's death today, the US Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer says she helped shape the modern world.
Her reign saw the dawn of the atomic age, the age of the internet, the fall of the Soviet Union, an unprecedented global pandemic. She didn't just witness the great turns of history, she helped shape them over the 7 decades of her reign. And every step of the way, she was precisely the kind of leader the moment demanded. I dare say we will never see a leader quite like her for as long as we live.
An historian says New Zealand's view of the monarchy and Britain changed considerably between the Queen's first visit to the country and her last. The first time was in 1953-54, when Jock Phillips says New Zealand saw itself as an honorary part of Britain. But by the time of her last visit in 2002, perceptions had changed, in particular because the United Kingdom's entry into the European Economic Community in 1973.
Suddenly, we were forced to look around and realise that actually we could sell things to China, and we could sell things to Australia, and we could sell things to Latin America. We didn't actually need a close relationship with the United Kingdom. So that made a big difference. And I think there was also a slight sense of betrayal.
Jock Phillips says changes in immigration policy also contributed to the changing views. The former Governor-General and High Commissioner in London, Sir Jerry Mateparae, says one of his fondest memories of the Queen is of sharing a joke with her at a solemn palace reception. He says that when he went to the Buckingham Palace in 1999 to be made an officer of the New Zealand Order of Merit, he was under strict instructions to receive his medal, bow, turn and depart.
It sort of worked up until the point where, as she's pinning the medal on, she says, you know, Colonel, this is the first time I've awarded one of my medals from New Zealand. And I said, Your Majesty, it's the first time I've received one. And she had a little chuckle. And then we had a chat about, you know, what things were going on and about New Zealand.
Sir Jerry says that exchange was typical of the Queen's interest in people. A proclamation of accession ceremony will be held at Parliament on Sunday to mark the accession of King Charles. Members of the public are welcome to gather in Parliament grounds for the ceremony, which starts at 12:30. Cabinet will convene beforehand for a special meeting, along with a meeting of the Executive Council, which includes the Governor-General, Dame Cindy Kiro. Parliament will sit briefly on Tuesday to acknowledge the Queen's passing before adjourning for the rest of the week. We'll have more in the news at 8 o'clock, and you can also follow our rolling coverage at rnz.co.nz. Now to the forecast from Met Service to midnight Saturday. Northland and Auckland, fine periods, isolated showers in the afternoon and evening. In the west, from Waikato to Wellington, cloudy with isolated showers today, scattered rain tomorrow. Coromandel Bay of plenty, the central high country. Also Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, mostly cloudy with showers. Turning to rain tomorrow, some heavy falls in Gisborne. Nelson and Marlborough, a few showers about coastal Marlborough. Fine periods elsewhere with isolated showers clearing this evening, but returning late tomorrow. Buller, Westland and Fiordland, fine apart from possible showers about Buller today. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, generally fine. Areas of low cloud morning and night, patchy drizzle about the coast. From Banks Peninsula north tomorrow evening. And at the Chathams, partly cloudy, the odd shower tomorrow. It is 7:06 here on RNZ National.
Tēna koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Welcome to this extended Checkpoint special to mark the death of Britain's longest reigning monarch. A wall of flowers, cards and candles for the late Queen Elizabeth II continues to grow around the outskirts of Buckingham Palace. It comes as Brits awake to their first day without their beloved Queen. Heartfelt tributes have also come from world leaders, celebrities and many of the everyday people the Queen loved so much. A 96-gun salute to mark each year of her life was held on the Wellington waterfront late this afternoon, with the New Zealand Army's 16 Field Regiment firing the rounds. Queen Elizabeth's life of service and dedication to the countries of the Commonwealth endeared her to many around the world. The BBC's Nicholas Witchell reflects on her remarkable life.
I here present unto you Queen Elizabeth,
your undoubted Queen. Is Your Majesty willing to take the oath?
She was 27 when she took the coronation oath.
I solemnly promise so to do.
She was anointed, blessed and consecrated. She took possession of a 1,200-year-old throne. She knew that it was a role from which only death could release her. And yet, when she was born, no one had thought that it would be her destiny. Elizabeth Alexandra Mary Windsor was born on the 21st of April, 1926. She was the first child of the then King's second son, the Duke of York. This was the young Princess Elizabeth at the age of 4, visiting a photographic studio in London. Her life then was comparatively carefree. It was the abdication in 1936 of her uncle, King Edward VIII, that unexpectedly placed Elizabeth in direct line to the throne. Her father became king. His coronation gave the then 11-year-old Elizabeth a foretaste of what lay in store for her. The family unit was strong. Her father, George VI, was devoted to her and she to him. Throughout her life, he was to be her inspiration. During the Second World War, as German bombs fell on Britain, the royal family symbolised the country's fight against tyranny. Elizabeth briefly joined up. She was taught how to drive and to service an army lorry. On the night Britain celebrated victory in Europe, the crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace and Elizabeth joined her family on the palace balcony. By now she was a young woman and she'd fallen in love. Her engagement to Lieutenant Philip Mountbatten was announced in July 1947. 4 months later, they were married in Westminster Abbey.
Again and again the people called for Elizabeth and Philip. Again and again they joyfully responded.
A year later, their first child, Charles, was born. 2 years after that, a daughter, Anne. The king had been in poor health. He'd been treated for lung cancer. When Elizabeth left for a visit to East Africa in February 1952, it was to be the last time she would see him.
The flag is low as the news spreads. The king is dead.
At the moment of her father's death from a heart attack, Elizabeth was in a game park in Kenya. The news that she was now queen was given to her by her husband.
Her tour of the Commonwealth cancelled. The princess we knew as a girl and watched in the even growth of her stature comes back to meet her ministers as queen.
In a way, I didn't have an apprenticeship. My father died much too young, and so it was all a very sudden kind of taking on and making the best job you can.
Britain was stunned at the loss of its wartime king. His coffin was brought by train from Sandringham to London. Elizabeth was there to receive it with her mother and sister.
And now, here comes Her Majesty.
Elizabeth's coronation in June 1953 was one of the biggest public celebrations in Britain's recent history. For the first time, television cameras were allowed into Westminster Abbey. The ceremony was broadcast to millions.
The moment of the Queen's crowning is come.
As Elizabeth was crowned, she accepted what, to her, was a sacred duty, an obligation to serve, which was to set her apart for the remainder of her life. Elizabeth was sovereign and head of state, not just of the United Kingdom, but of Britain's realms and territories in every continent.
Sydney-siders turn out to greet their Queen.
In late 1953, she set off on the first of many overseas tours, with a 6-month trip to Australia, New Zealand and the Pacific.
I want to tell you all how happy I am to be amongst you and how much I look forward to my journey through Australia.
This is a joyous, spine-tingling welcome.
The young Queen was a star on the world stage, and her popularity was never greater. It's estimated that, in Australia, 3/4 of the country's entire population turned out to see her in person. But as the 1950s gave way to the swinging 60s of the Beatles, attitudes started to change. Old certainties were questioned. The monarchy was seen by some to be stuffy and out of touch. By the late 60s, the palace realised that it needed to take the initiative. The result was a groundbreaking television documentary. The film Royal Family showed the monarchy as it had never been seen before. Elizabeth was shown performing the daily business of the sovereign.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, do you think you could bring up those papers that I was looking at yesterday?
And meeting visiting dignitaries.
The American ambassador, Your Majesty.
Oh, why have you done that?
Save you trouble.
But the film also showed something of the private Elizabeth, relaxing with her family on a picnic at Balmoral.
The salad is ready.
Good.
Her silver jubilee was celebrated with street parties and pageants in 1977.
Good evening, Your Majesty.
You've had a very long day.
By the 1980s, Britain had its first woman Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher. Relations between female head of state and female head of government were sometimes said to have been strained.
With this ring, I thee wed.
For the Queen and her family, the 1980s had begun with a moment of great promise. Prince Charles's wedding in July 1981 to the young Lady Diana Spencer seemed to be a moment of hope for the future. When the marriage began to fail, its decline was a very public one. The couple's separation was announced in 1992. It followed the collapse of the marriages of Princess Anne and Prince Andrew. To compound the misery that year, the Queen had seen part of her favourite home, Windsor Castle, destroyed by fire. She was devastated. The fire seemed to symbolise the reversal of the royal family's fortunes. Little wonder that in a speech the Queen described 1992 as her annus horribilis, her horrible year. But worse was to follow. The death of the by now divorced Diana, Princess of Wales, in a car crash in Paris in August 1997 was to provoke what, for the Queen, was a shocking backlash against the monarchy. She'd remained at Balmoral with Princes William and Harry after Diana died. Her priority had been to care for her grandsons. But to the grieving crowds outside Buckingham Palace and elsewhere, it seemed as though the royal family simply didn't care. The Queen returned to Buckingham Palace and, in an unprecedented live broadcast on the eve of Diana's funeral, she tried to heal the breach that had opened between the palace and the people.
What I say to you now, as your Queen and as a grandmother, I say from my heart.
The Queen promised to learn the lessons from Diana's life and the reaction to her death. The whole episode had shaken her. For the first time, she'd appeared to be out of tune with the feelings of her people. With Charles's marriage to his long-term companion Camilla Parker Bowles in April 2005, the royal family was finally able to turn the page on the domestic anguish of previous decades. It was time to move on. For the Queen, it was a moment of relief, and in the years that followed, with scarcely any lessening of her workload, she appeared to enjoy her role with renewed enthusiasm. In 2011, she was at Westminster Abbey for the wedding of her grandson Prince William to Catherine Middleton. It was a moment when the public's appreciation for the monarchy seemed to be reconfirmed. A few weeks later, at the age of 85, the Queen made one of the most important foreign visits of her reign when she became the first British monarch to visit the Republic of Ireland. She laid a wreath in memory of those Irish nationalists who'd risen up against the Crown, and at a state dinner in Dublin Castle, she spoke with regret about Britain's treatment of Ireland.
With the benefit of historical hindsight, we can all see things which we would wish had been done differently, or not at all.
The following year in Belfast, she met and shook hands with Martin McGuinness, a former leader of the IRA who by then was Deputy First Minister of Northern Ireland. It was another significant gesture of reconciliation. Her Diamond Jubilee in 2012 confirmed the nation's regard for a monarch who'd reigned for 60 years.
Mr. Bond, Your Majesty.
It was also the year when the Queen showed that she too could spring a surprise.
Good evening, Mr. Bond.
Good evening, Your Majesty.
Sovereign and secret agent, one of the highlights of the opening night of the London Olympics. By the time of her 90th birthday in April 2016, she'd become the United Kingdom's longest reigning monarch, its oldest, and few would disagree, one of its most deeply respected. She continued with her public duties well into her 90s. There was further family turmoil, though. Prince Andrew was forced to withdraw from public life amid claims he'd sexually assaulted a 17-year-old, claims he denied. And then the Sussexes, Harry and Meghan, decided that they wanted to step back from royal life. They moved to California and gave a television interview in which Meghan made damaging criticisms of the royal family. They were unsettling moments, presided over by a monarch who showed that her sense of commitment was undiminished.
Together we are tackling this disease.
During the coronavirus emergency of 2020, she broadcast a reassuring message to the nation.
We should take comfort that while we may have more still to endure, better days will return. We will be with our friends again. We will be with our families again. We will meet again.
Her words seem to encapsulate her role as monarch, drawing on her own long experience to help settle the nation at a moment of difficulty. Her resilience was evident again in April 2021, when her beloved husband Philip died 2 months short of his 100th birthday. They'd been married for 73 years. At Philip's funeral at St George's Chapel within Windsor Castle, she seemed a solitary figure, pausing at one point to turn and look back. The figure who'd been 2 paces behind her for so many years was now absent. Elizabeth had lost the husband who'd meant so much to her. But despite the great sadness of her loss, there was never any question of her withdrawing from the path of duty. She marked the 70th anniversary of her accession to the throne, a record no other monarch had achieved, in February 2022. By then it was apparent that she was rather more frail physically than before, though mentally as sharp as ever. Her doctors had advised her to take things a little easier. Light duties was the expression used by the palace, but every day there were red boxes full of official papers to deal with. In a message to mark her 70 years on the throne, she said she was humbled by the loyalty and affection she'd received throughout her reign. And she signed the statement, "Your servant, Elizabeth R." By June 2022 and the public celebration of her Platinum Jubilee, her declining health limited the events she could attend. There was, however, a delightful surprise. A pre-recorded appearance, a somewhat chaotic tea party with Paddington Bear.
Perhaps you would like a marmalade sandwich. I always keep one for emergencies.
So do I. I keep mine in here.
Happy Jubilee, ma'am. And thank you for everything.
That's very kind.
This was a monarch at peace and enjoying herself. On the final day of the Jubilee celebrations, there was a final appearance on the balcony of Buckingham Palace. the national anthem was sung, a much-loved monarch acknowledged the many thousands who'd waited to greet her. The crowds cheered and cheered, but finally it was time to go. The Queen turned to depart from the balcony on which she'd first been seen as a baby. There was an unspoken feeling that an era was drawing to a close.
And that was royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell with that remarkable, look back at Queen Elizabeth's life. It is 21 minutes after 7 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. If you are just joining us, we'll be with you until 8 o'clock tonight for this program in memory of Queen Elizabeth. Whether it's a meeting in person, a glance in a crowd or a royal letter, many New Zealanders have a connection to Queen Elizabeth II. Producer Tom Taylor caught up with some Kiwis with stories to tell about the long-reigning monarch.
Cecilia Hurley's grandparents and mother were hosting the then Princess Elizabeth at the Treetops Hotel in Kenya when a wire came through announcing the death of King George VI. It's a story that was passed down through the generations, although Ms. Hurley had to do some detective work to learn about it from her mother.
She just never really talked about it. It was only occasionally when, I was rummaging through her office one day and in the storeroom, and it came up with all these pictures, and I said, "Mum, can you tell me the story?"
Ms. Hurley's grandfather, Eric Sherbrooke Walker, escorted Princess Elizabeth and Prince Philip to the hotel, with some excitement along the way.
They had to go through a forest where there were obviously wild animals like buffalo and elephant and rhino and all sorts of other African game treading through there. So they had to go very tentatively. And an elephant came out in front of them, and they had to scramble up a ladder into a tree to not be run over by this elephant, which was about 8 yards from where they were. And Her Majesty showed the most incredible courage of an animal coming towards her at such close proximity.
When the royals got up into the treehouse, they didn't appear too shaken by the encounter and sat out watching the herds of elephants, buffalo and rhino below. The next day, news of the king's death reached them by a relayed phone call.
She was very heartbroken once the news came through, and then they had to obviously get her back to the UK as soon as possible when she was in the middle of Africa, which was pretty challenging at that time as well.
50 years later, when Queen Elizabeth visited New Zealand for the last time, Ms. Hurley wrote to the Governor-General to ask that her mother be allowed to attend a garden party in Auckland. Her mother remembered that the Queen had carried a cinema camera and was filming the wildlife from up in the treetops.
My mum asked her what had happened to the film that she'd taken of all the elephants, because there was something like 100 elephants that came to the waterhole that day, which is quite poignant, because there weren't that many that came on a regular basis. To have that number of elephants turn up when something significant like a death had happened was really quite moving. And their conversation was about what had happened to the films and, what had happened to them. And she said, "Oh, my grandchildren put them all onto CD-ROMs for me." So that was her amazing memory of the time she spent up treetops with Her Majesty. And that recollection between the two women was just incredible, because nobody else could have known about that.
Frances Tennant Brown was just a toddler when the Queen rolled through Te Puke in 1953, but she has a vivid memory of the sea of people that gathered to catch a glimpse of Her Majesty.
We were all squeezed into our little Ford Prefect and taken off into town to see the Queen go through. But the surprising thing to me was that I do remember it, because I was only 2.
Ms. Tennant Brown says at the time she had no idea what all the fuss was about. Just a vague notion that she was waiting around for the most famous person in the world.
This big black car came past, and there she was, sitting in the back seat and smiling at us and waving as she went past, and that was the Queen.
Normally, people have to wait until their 100th birthday to receive royal correspondence. But Kevin Grimwood of Christchurch was just 28 when he had the rare honour of receiving an email from the Queen. Her very first official email, in fact. Mr. Grimwood, who was one of 16 representatives on the Commonwealth Youth Caucus, says when it came to the 60th anniversary of the Commonwealth, the Queen opted for a more modern approach to reach out to its young members.
It was very brief, it was 3 paragraphs, and she just talked about kind of the broad spirit of service and to acknowledge the service, I guess, each of us as volunteer young leaders that we're engaging in. And I did write back. I don't recall what I said. I'm sure it was something I thought was particularly intelligent as a 28-year-old.
Mr. Grimwood says the Queen's life touched many people in some way, and her death marks the end of an era.
The woman that was Elizabeth wore it well. You know, she seems to have remained humble and seems to have maintained a focus on service. The fact that no matter what was going on for her physically, I think I saw a photo taken within the last 2 days of her standing with the new English Prime Minister and, you know, inviting them to form a government. So she's still honouring those commitments and doing those things right up until the moment of her death. It's very impressive.
And that report was from Tom Taylor, who was speaking to Kiwis about their stories, telling their stories about Queen Elizabeth. Auckland's St Matthew's in the city has commemorated the Queen today by ringing its Tēna bell 96 times in Her Majesty's honour. The bells rang out over Auckland first thing this morning at midday and will be going off again at 7:30 this evening. Our reporter Nick Trubridge joins us live from there. Kia ora, Nick. Bring us up to speed with what's been going on there today.
Hi Lisa, well as you just said, we are in St Matthew's in the city. We promised you we would be here later, and now we are. For those of you who are listening and not watching, Nick's just going to pan up for a second. It is a grand building for a grand occasion, and there will be many more occasions over the next couple of weeks. If people are wondering why there aren't any pews in here at the moment, well, there's plenty of events coming up. And there will be plenty more to, of course, commemorate the Queen's 96 years. The bells, that's why we're here, of course, the bells, the bells, the bells. I've got Scott here, who is the master of all things bells. Well, one of several bell masters here, I suppose you would say, Scott.
Not the master, but a master, perhaps.
Tell us what we're going to hear tonight. We've heard, obviously, 96 rings earlier today. Tonight's going to be slightly different. Run us through it.
Yeah, so earlier today you heard us ring 96 to mark her 96 years, and tonight we're going to ring a quarter peal, which is 1,260 rings, or that we do, and that's based on, and then we call that a quarter peal. So a full peal is 5,040, and that is every different combination you can do on 8 bells. Now tonight we're actually ringing on 6, but the math still works. So it's going to be 1,260. It's going to take us around 45 minutes of continuous ringing. So I should probably start getting ready.
Scott's got to race off because he's actually got a job to do. Obviously, he's got to go climb the bell tower, I imagine.
Yes.
Climb the bell tower and start ringing. So we'll let Scott go very briefly. We've also got Helen, who many Aucklanders will know is the vicar here at St Matthew's. A big occasion today, obviously, and many more big occasions to come over the next couple of weeks. Talk us through the day so far.
Well, yes, like everyone, we woke up with the news this morning and my immediate thought was, I must contact the bell ringers and see what their plans are, and then came into the church to get a space ready for candle lighting, and people have been dribbling in during the day to have a quiet moment to remember Her Majesty.
And what have you got coming up over the next couple of weeks?
So on Sunday morning, we've changed the format of our service a little bit. We'll begin with silence and more bell ringing, and we will have some special music, and then we will probably be supporting our cathedral, who will be having the main memorial service, but we'll obviously be remembering the Queen all through this time.
The point we've sort of been labouring the whole show tonight is, of course, she was Aotearoa's Queen, as well as, of course, the British Queen and the rest of the Commonwealth. But for you personally, what was she to you? When you woke up this morning, you said you heard it over the radio at 6:30. What was the first thing that went through your head, and what are your memories?
Well, of course, like many people, I thought of my grandmother, and I thought of my grandmother sitting us down on Christmas Day to always listen to the Queen's message. And even though she is no longer with us, we always still do that, because if we didn't, we know that Nana would be cross with us. So I thought of her, and I thought of my extended family and our memories of respecting the Queen all through our lives.
Let's walk over to the bells quickly, because we're going to hear them just in the stairwell over here. If you just bear with us, Nick's following them. And of course, it's about 45 minutes tonight, isn't it? And they're muffled. Tell us why.
Yes, they're muffled, and they are only fully muffled on the death of the monarch. So they have not been fully muffled for 70 years. We half muffle them on occasions for funerals, but they've only been fully muffled, and that means that the clappers are completely covered in a leather cover. And so the sound will be quite a dull sound compared to the normal sound that Aucklanders are used to with our bells ringing out over the city.
And they should be any second now. Muffled for the death of a monarch, why?
It's tradition, and there's enormous traditions around bell towers and bell ringing, and that's tradition handed down from the Church of England to churches, but all of the cathedrals across the Communion and many churches all across the world will be following the same practice.
And of course, we are standing by. They should be any second. Service on Sunday. Tell us how it's going to be slightly different this time around to your standard Sunday service. It's a special occasion, obviously.
So special prayers for the Queen and for the royal family, and beginning with some time of silence, and our musicians have chosen some music that is suitable for the occasion. So we changed our schedule today of what they were going to be doing.
Still waiting. How were people feeling as they came past today?
If we go closer, we might be able to hear them, I think. I'll cut out.
Slowly. We're just cutting out the traffic noise, Lisa. We'll just see if we can hear them. For those of you who are watching, we're sort of standing in the, what would you call this, Helen? It's the
bell tower.
It's the bell tower.
It's a very narrow
it is a very narrow set of stairs.
Nick,
we should be
can
coming
you hear
any
me?
second. Yep.
Yeah, I'm
can.
thinking we'll go to the headlines because we're really interested to hear this. Can you just ask quickly
We'll come back.
How high up the tower is where the bells are? Can we get a rough idea of the distance up to the bell tower?
How high up is Scott right now? How high up is the bell tower?
I should know that. It's a good 5-minute walk up there, and it's very narrow.
It's a good 5 minutes, Lisa. So we did really put Scott to the test because we had him on at 5:25 and he's racing up.
Exactly.
Should we go to the headlines?
Yeah, let's go to the headlines, and we'll come back to you. Yeah, because I'd like to hear this.
They're going to be going 45 minutes, so we're going to have plenty of time. So
no fear that we're going to miss out then, Nick. So we'll come back to you shortly. Do stand by. That is Nick Trubridge, who is downtown in Auckland at St Matthew's in the city, and they're going to start ringing the bells to commemorate, the Queen's service. So we'll go back to him when that starts happening. But in the meantime, do send us your stories, homai or whakaaro. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at checkpointrnz, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. I do think there's someone standing by to give us the headlines, so let's go to them now, and it's Catriona.
Kia ora, Lisa. The new British monarch, King Charles, is preparing to return to London after spending the night at Balmoral Castle, where the Queen died early this morning. He's due to meet Britain's new Prime Minister, Liz Truss. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says discussions are underway over how to acknowledge the Queen with a permanent memorial in New Zealand. And former Governor-General Sir Jerry Mateparae has paid tribute to the Queen, saying she was exceptionally easy to engage with. Those are the headlines. More in the news at 8.
And thank you for being with us. We're on air for another half hour with this extended programme of Checkpoint this evening to, mark the death of Queen Elizabeth. And people across the country have expressed great sadness and admiration for Queen Elizabeth II in the wake of her death. British expats have painted a picture of the mood back home, while Kiwis have expressed their shock at waking up to the news this morning. And even those uncomfortable with the Crown's legacy say they admire the Queen's dedication to her cause. And Nick Trubridge and our cameraman Nick Munro have been out talking to people in Auckland.
Aotearoa Square, Tamaki Makaurau, some 18,000 kilometres away from the seat of Her Majesty. But the sense of sadness, of loss, is far-reaching, is palpable.
Incredible sadness, and I'm still getting waves of extreme melancholy. Yeah. For a lot of people, I think it's simply that we've never known anyone else, my entire lifetime. So it's a huge passing of an era.
He cuts a dejected figure in the square, dressed in a tie and tailcoat. His top hat and cane sit on a bench by his side. He's meeting with friends. They'll all be dressed like this, heading out for lunch to raise a toast to Queen Elizabeth II.
And I've spoken to several people that I know, and they've had similar feelings to me. And yes, we don't know her personally, but yes, she's had a profound, influence on our lives in some way.
It's a sentiment shared by everyone here. We didn't know her, but we did know her. So it all comes as a bit of a shock, sorrow, quickly followed by admiration.
I've just spent a long time with her in my life, and see her to pass away at the age of 96 was, I lost my own grandmother just recently, so I know feel for the family.
I think it's pretty amazing that 2 days ago there she was welcoming the new Prime Minister of the UK, and doing that with an incredible presence and smile. I was quite touched by that, I have to say.
We don't realise how much it would have taken out from her life and how much she would have contributed to the world. But what a life! It is legendary. So yeah, good on her. Awesome.
Even amongst those uncomfortable with the Crown's legacy, express great respect for a figure who dedicated over 70 years to service.
It's a double-edged sword, but as a mother, I think, and as a leader, I think her qualities were really, really commendable. She was a very good leader.
And as we reach Auckland's downtown, the news starts to travel.
Queen died.
Yeah, can we ask?
Yeah, no, shocked actually. Yeah. It's interesting to know. So, yeah, we just come from Australia, so, yeah.
I didn't have any idea that she had died until someone mentioned it at breakfast time. So, yeah, very sad news. She is our queen, I'm not a big royalist, but, it's a significant milestone, isn't it, her death?
We all shared about how she died and what she used to do. But she was my friend. She was my best friend.
Her lifetime was full of goodness for the Empire, the Commonwealth. And I think she's been a marvellous queen.
She's in a good place now. She will be with her Prince Philip. Yeah, so, all I will say is all the best to the monarch or, the family.
Among the masses on Auckland's viaduct, there's many an expat mourning their loss while painting a picture of the mood back home.
I spoke to my mother-in-law this morning and, she was, shocked because it was just so quick because obviously she was swearing in the Prime Minister on Tuesday and then 2 days later she's no longer with us.
She was held closely, whether you're a royalist or not. She was held closely by the British people. We liked her, loved her, respected her. She's been in the job a long time. So, yeah, it'll be, a sad UK waking up to that news.
I would think it's nearly 100% sad this morning, sadness. Everybody thinks the Queen's wonderful, and I'm sure they're right. And the royal family, I hope, and Charles will follow in their footsteps and do such a good job as she's done. So that's how I'm seeing it.
The people here use the word transcendent. Transcendent as a leader, as the world changed decade to decade, a figure admired well beyond the bounds of the Commonwealth.
Wonder how Charles is feeling this morning. I'm sure the whole country is going to be very sad about it, and the whole world will be.
I think she's going to be missed, by the people in England as well as around the world. A lot of high regard for her. It's all very positive. Yes.
But for New Zealanders, the death leaves many of us feeling hollow. A leader we all felt we knew, a constant through our lifetimes, suddenly gone.
It's just the passing of an era, isn't it? What else can you say? That's about it, It's just the passing of an era. It's going to be interesting to see what the future holds, isn't it?
So it was planned that we would toast to her with a wee champers this morning, but it's turned into coffee, so that was all good. Cheers to her.
And right now, our cameraman Nick Monroe and reporter Nick Trowbridge are at St Matthew's in the city. They've been commemorating the life and service of the Queen today by ringing the bells. And Nick is there at the moment. Nick, can you talk us through what's happening?
Hi, Lisa. It's a bit echoey because I'm coming to you from the base of the St Matthew's in the city bell tower. We promised you bells, didn't we? We promised you bells to finish the show in memory of Queen Elizabeth II, 96 years, 70-year reign, and we delivered. The bells, they are ringing. We'll give you a sound and a taste in a second. 70 years on the throne, 45 minutes the bells will ring in central Auckland. Of course, as Helen explained earlier, muffled for the death of a monarch. Take a listen to this.
Just the gentle sounds of the bells ringing at St Matthew's in the city. Throughout the day, they've been commemorating the Queen, her life and service, as Nick said there, 70 years on the throne. And as we were told earlier, the bells are actually wrapped, sign of respect when a monarch passes. They're fully wrapped, which accounts for their muted sound, but they're ringing for the next 45 minutes if you're in and around the city. A Napier woman has decked out her home in Union Jacks to commemorate the Queen's passing. Dorothy Galloway was one of the first in line at the Anglican Cathedral this morning to sign the condolence book and pay her respects. Our Hawke's Bay reporter Tom Kitchen has more.
As the bells ring 96 times at the Waiapu Cathedral in Napier, one for every year the Queen lived, Mrs Galloway places a beautiful bouquet of flowers at the nearby fountain. The 83-year-old talks of her fondness for the monarch.
She has been a constant in my life since I was a little girl, and I've admired her devotion to the country, the UK, and also the Commonwealth.
She has seen the Queen 4 times, once in Scotland, twice in Napier, and one special time in her hometown of Liverpool.
She was in Liverpool opening up, there was a new boat ship that was being launched. I came as close to her as I am to you.
She celebrated the Queen's Platinum Jubilee this year with the most pomp and circumstance, a special dress-up party at home.
We had the flags and we had the balloons flying at the gate. And we had the candlesticks with the red candles in it. We had the long table set with all the old china.
Today, she's got the flags of New Zealand and the United Kingdom proudly flying at home.
The flags are flying from my letterbox in Taradale at the moment. The only ones in my road, but there'll be more, I'm sure.
And Mrs Galloway is already planning her next party.
Don't throw away your tiara or your pearls. We've got a coronation to celebrate in 10 months' time.
In the cathedral's condolence book, Mrs Galloway wrote, "My beloved Queen, I loved you dearly."
Tom Kitchen reporting there. Former New Zealand journalist Simon Walker worked as the Queen's Communications Secretary for the Golden Jubilee when she celebrated 50 years on the throne. He was heading out to an evening function when he heard the news, and he told me it was the end of an era.
And I think people will remember where they were when they heard that the Queen had died, because it's sort of such a seminal moment. She was Queen before I was born, and I'm not that young, so it is extraordinary, and she's had a remarkable sort of pulling together effect on this country, which has had a very difficult few years. But Liz Truss, the new Prime Minister, said today that she was the rock on which modern Britain had been built, and I think there's a lot of truth in that. That this very divided and often fractured society, she was the one person who pulled everyone together, and will be much missed.
What was it like to work for her? And what about the first time you met her? Were you scared?
Well, of course I was scared the first time I met her. The Queen tried very hard to put people at their ease, but of course it didn't work, because you couldn't possibly be at your ease when you were talking to the Queen. But she did behave in a very friendly and warm way, and I think she could relate really across the board to people right across the community. Obviously one knows of her historic role and where she fits in the sort of in British society, but that in a way is not the point. She had a real finger on the pulse, and I think related to people generally, had a very good sense of public opinion, in that sense was a remarkable person to work for, because she was a conservative person, she was a cautious person who recognised a historic role, but was also ready to modernise. And she did modernise carefully over the last 30 years, I would say, particularly. And in that way has sort of held up a mirror to the changes in British society.
She seemed to be kind of the hippest 96-year-old, I'd ever seen, as you say, in terms of modernising and taking the monarchy forward, but also in terms of her attitude. What was your experience with that?
She was very open to change, and that was partly because she felt a real responsibility to the whole community. I mean, she was very emphatic about diversity. When I worked on the Golden Jubilee, it was made absolutely clear that it had to appeal to young people as well as old people. It had to appeal to all ethnicities, all religious groups. It couldn't, she's the head of the Church of England, but it wasn't necessarily going to be that sort of an event, and it wanted to appeal to people who were religious and people who weren't religious, and just the whole of society. So it was that breadth that was remarkable about her. And, at the Golden Jubilee, we held a pop concert that was very much aimed at, young people, and I think 15,000 people were invited into the gardens at Buckingham Palace to hear people like Ozzy Osbourne perform in front of the Queen, and that was pretty radical stuff 20 years ago. But she was always willing to look to the future and to change things, but she didn't leap into it. I think she recognized the history that she symbolized and the tradition that was part of where she was. So, she was a remarkable person to work for, but you could never be at ease with the Queen.
It's the Queen, after all.
It just didn't work. Yes.
Did you enjoy that time working with her?
I did. I enjoyed it immensely. It was a good time. Jubilees are parties, really, and the whole nation came together. The Commonwealth actually came together for a good time. And it's important to remember the monarchies had bad times as well as good times. And I was lucky when I was there. But the Queen, even when there were difficulties, one of the remarkable things about her was that she would sometimes be the only calm person in the room, and while everyone else was sort of running around flapping, she'd say, I remember it was rather like this in 1956, or some other reference to a long time ago, and that in itself gave a sense of balance to what we were all doing. So, yes, she was an extraordinary figure to work for, and really quite inspiring in the sense of duty, obligation, and kind of commitment that she always had.
And that was the Queen's former Communications Secretary, Simon Walker. After decades of waiting, Prince Charles now becomes King Charles III. He's been the longest-serving heir apparent in Commonwealth history, and at 73 becomes the oldest new monarch. Max Toll has this report.
At lovely Windlesham Moor, their recently acquired country home at Sunningdale, Princess Elizabeth and Prince Philip spend a happy afternoon with the world's most famous baby. These are the first newsreel pictures taken since his christening of Prince Charles, now 8 months old.
King Charles III was born at Buckingham Palace on November the 14th, 1948, the first child of then Princess Elizabeth and Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. He would become the heir apparent upon his mother's accession to the throne in 1952 and has since been the longest-serving heir apparent. He said he didn't enjoy going to school as he much preferred being at home, and so broke from tradition by heading to Cambridge University instead of joining the armed forces.
Cambridge. Trinity College waited to welcome a new freshman, and it's not every newcomer who's greeted by the master, Lord Butler. But then the new boy was the heir apparent to the throne, arriving in a Mini for a major step in his career. The occasion was both informal and formal, with Lord Butler introducing Prince Charles to Mr. Dennis Marion, the senior tutor. It was clear from the start that the college's motto, always the same, won't really apply for the next couple of years while the Prince studies archaeology and anthropology there.
He therefore became the first British heir apparent to earn a university degree, a Bachelor of Arts. Yet he would follow his father's legacy by training in the Royal Air Force and later serving on Royal Navy ships.
At the Britannia Royal Naval College, the start of a new training course for Prince Charles, who arrived wearing the uniform of an acting sub-lieutenant. The college staff were present to greet the new student, and the naval cadets put on a parade in his honour.
As a young adult, the object of Charles's affection became the subject of great media scrutiny. He was romantically linked with several bachelorettes, including Camilla Shand, who would later become his second wife. He even proposed to Amanda Knatchbull, the granddaughter of his beloved great-uncle Lord Mountbatten, but marriage never eventuated. That would come after his meeting Lady Diana Spencer in 1977, the sister of a companion. They would not form a romantic attachment until 1980 and would marry a year later. He was asked in an interview about public reaction to the match.
The most overwhelming and touching reactions as far as we've been concerned. I of course, went to New Zealand and Australia and Venezuela and then America on the way back. This was in April, May, and there people were amazingly friendly and enthusiastic. And since then, all the times I've been around different parts of the country here, the reaction has been literally fantastic, and I've never seen so many people around and such friendliness and overwhelming sort of generosity and endless cards and presents and just, I think, the most marvellous, warm, affectionate reaction, which I just find incredibly touching.
Charles and Diana would have two sons, Prince William, the Duke of Cambridge, and Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex. But their marriage would end on a turbulent note. After rumours of incompatibility and his lingering affection for Camilla, they would legally separate in 1992 and divorce in 1996. Princess Diana would die a year later. This was Charles's first subsequent public appearance.
I also wanted to say how particularly moved and enormously comforted my children and I were, and indeed still are, by the public response to Diana's death. It has been really quite remarkable and indeed in many ways overwhelming. And I think, as probably many of you will know from the experience of family loss perhaps in your own lives, it is inevitably very difficult to cope with grief at any time. But perhaps you might realize it's even harder when the whole world is watching at the same time. But obviously the public support and the warmth of that support has helped quite enormously. And I can't tell you how enormously grateful and touched both the boys and myself are.
Charles would reunite with Camilla, by then Camilla Parker Bowles, and marry in 2005. The daughter of a British Army officer and businessman and of a baron, she now becomes Princess Consort. Camilla rarely speaks publicly, save for a few occasions on issues she's passionate about, such as preventing domestic abuse.
Seeing is believing, or hearing is believing. I think, like many other people in this country, I didn't know much about domestic abuse. In fact, I knew nothing at all. I read a bit about it. And I think that I went to visit another charity called Save Lives, where again I sat round and listened to some very brave ladies tell their stories, and I think everybody there was moved to tears.
During his life, Charles has founded more than a dozen charitable organisations and is a patron of hundreds more. He is known as a hard-working member of the royal family, dutifully carrying out engagements. He's been a keen polo player and took part in fox hunting until its ban in the UK in 2005. He's also become a passionate advocate for climate action and spoke before world leaders at the COP26 summit in Glasgow.
Having myself had the opportunity of consulting many of you over these past 18 months, I know you all carry a heavy burden on your shoulders, and you do not need me to tell you that the eyes and hopes of the world are upon you, to act with all dispatch and decisively, because time has quite literally run out.
In recent years, Charles's image has been tied to the fate of the Queen and much has been made of his being the longest-serving heir apparent. But it is a subject on which he has never expressed frustration, rather patience, acknowledging the expectations that will now fall upon him. He's rejected suggestions that he will be a meddling king.
The idea somehow that I'm going to go on exactly the same way, if I have to succeed, is complete nonsense.
He now ascends to the throne as King Charles III.
The Queen's first Prime Minister was Winston Churchill, and her last and the 15th, Liz Truss, who she swore in earlier this week. She met countless world leaders in her 70-year reign and touched many, many lives. We end this Checkpoint special with these tributes from leaders around the world.
A few moments ago, Buckingham Palace announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. The Palace has just issued this statement. It says the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon.
Perhaps tens of thousands of people have already turned up, pouring down the Mall, coming to pay their respects.
The death of Her Majesty the Queen is a huge shock to the nation and to the world.
This is our country's saddest day, says Boris Johnson, the bright and shining light that has finally gone out. She seemed so timeless, he says, and so wonderful that I'm afraid we've come to believe, like children, that she would just go on and on. Former Prime Minister Tony Blair, we've lost not just our monarch, but the matriarch of our nation.
I think we are all mourning the fact that somebody who was a constant in our lives has now passed away.
She was an incredibly gracious and decent woman. The thoughts and prayers of the American people are with the people of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth in their grief.
She has also demonstrated courage, compassion and humour. A strong memory I will have of her is her laughter. She was extraordinary.
Australian hearts go out to the people of the United Kingdom who mourn today, knowing they will feel they have lost part of what makes their nation whole.
Thoughtful, wise, curious, helpful. She was one of my favourite people in the world.
President Macron, I remember her as a friend of France, a kind-hearted queen. And Charles says this: we mourn profoundly the passing of a cherished sovereign and a much-loved mother. I know her loss will be deeply felt throughout the country, the realms and the Commonwealth, and by countless people around the world.
Sir Elton John has also paid tribute to the Queen at his concert in Toronto. The singer says the Queen has been with him all his life and that she deserves a rest because she's worked bloody hard. The 74-year-old then launched into his 1974 hit, Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me.
She will be missed, but her spirit lives on as we celebrate her life tonight with music.
RNZ News at 8. Ngā mihi nui, I'm Catriona McLeod. The new British monarch, King Charles, will soon travel to London with the Queen Consort to prepare for his first televised address to the nation. He and his wife Camilla were at Balmoral Castle in Scotland when the Queen died early this morning. The BBC's Johnny Diamond reports.
The first day of the reign of King Charles III has begun. A day of mourning and reflection for the late Queen. A day of long-planned ceremony and a day when the new monarch takes his place within the machinery of state. The King will travel with the Queen Consort to London. The Prime Minister will have an audience with His Majesty later in the day. In the evening, he will address the nation. At midday, bells will ring out from Windsor and across the nation in remembrance of the 96 years of the late Queen's life.
King Charles is due to meet Britain's new Prime Minister Liz Truss. Flowers have been laid outside the gates of Buckingham Palace in memory of the Queen. Members of the public are again gathering outside the palace in central London.
Heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking. The Queen means everything to me like my mum means to me. She was a fantastic lady. She'll always be a fantastic lady. She'll always be a part of my life forever.
She meant a lot to me. For someone my age, I've got quite old grandparents who were born in the 1917 and 22, so she was part of their lives too. So talking to them, they knew her growing up.
India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi has paid tribute to Queen Elizabeth II. He says the late monarch exuded kindness and warmth. Our correspondent Ishan Garg has more.
Senior Indian leaders are paying their tributes to Queen Elizabeth II. After Prime Minister Narendra Modi's message, India's Commerce Minister said the Queen was a true friend of India. While Indians see the British colonial rule as an era of tragedy and darkness, Queen Elizabeth II was seen as a post-colonial leader with a soft corner for the Commonwealth. She visited India thrice, most recently in 1997. On all her 3 visits, she toured the nation extensively and interacted with the leading charitable figures of the day.
The Prime Minister says New Zealand can continue to build relationships with the UK through its new monarch. Jacinda Ardern says the Queen was very clear Charles be acknowledged as her successor, including through the renaming of public holidays and his image on currency. She says Charles has a strong affinity for New Zealand.
He deeply respects the relationship that we have with our environment. That's something that he's very strong on. He has a strong relationship with New Zealand through the Prince's Trust, which he's done a lot of work with our young people. He's very knowledgeable about New Zealand, and I think, again, that speaks to his love of this country, and I think he'll fully expect that it will be a relationship that will grow with time.
A proclamation of accession ceremony will be held on Parliament steps at 12:30 on Sunday. The former Governor-General, Sir Jerry Mateparae, says he has many memories of the Queen, both in her public capacity and on a personal level.
She had a way of welcoming you into her company. She was engaging, she was gracious, she had a sharp wit, she was inquisitive, wanted to know things and well-informed as well.
Sir Jerry, who was also High Commissioner in London, says the Queen was exceptionally easy to engage with. The son of a security officer for the Queen on the day her father died says the weight of responsibility weighed heavy on her. King George VI died in 1952, while Princess Elizabeth, as she was then, was at Kenya's oldest safari lodge, Treetops. Philip Jenkins says his father recalled the Queen's trip to the nearest airport after hearing the news.
The entire East African Safari Rifles, which was the regiment of the military regiment of Kenya, had assembled and lined the route with bowed heads and barrels of their weapons in the sand. Every 100 yards or so, all lining the route all the way to the airport as this motorcade went flying past them in a cloud of dust.
Philip Jenkins says Elizabeth famously went up the tree a princess and came down a queen. And that's the news. We'll have more in the news at 9 o'clock, and you can also follow our rolling coverage at rnz.co.nz. Now to the forecast from Met Service to midnight Saturday. Northland and Auckland, fine periods. Isolated afternoon and evening showers. In the west from Waikato to Wellington, cloudy with isolated showers today, scattered rain tomorrow. Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, the central high country, also Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa. Mostly cloudy with showers turning to rain tomorrow. Some heavy falls in Gisborne. Nelson and Marlborough, a few showers about coastal Marlborough. Fine periods elsewhere with isolated showers tomorrow evening. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, isolated showers about Bulla clearing this evening, otherwise fine. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, generally fine. Areas of low cloud morning and night. Patchy drizzle about the coast from Banks Peninsula north tomorrow evening. And at the Chatham Islands, partly cloudy with the odd shower tomorrow. It's 6 minutes past 8 here on RNZ National.
Kia ora. Brian Crump with you for another evening on RNZ National, Te Reo, Irirangi or Aotearoa. A little later than usual, but then it's not our usual Friday night. It's the first Friday night this